I'd recognize that.
Who's on the line?
Hello. Hi, Terry. I recognize that you recognize me. Good morning.
Good morning. The whole room recognizes you. Good morning.
Good morning.
There's a couple others. Oh, yeah. Can they just say who they are?
Carrie Miller from Excel and Ed is on the line.
Hi, Carrie. It's Terry.
Good morning.
Karen Ortiz with Helios Education Foundation Online.
This is Carmen Castro from the Sunnyside School District Online.
Good morning, Carmen. Nice to hear your voice.
Good morning.
I don't think she's.
Terry.
We are 2 minutes away from starting. I think we're just, sorry, we're 2 minutes away from starting. Just give us a couple more minutes. Those on the phone, just be patient with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
These won't turn off? What's the story with that? They don't mute or anything? No, normally they just turn off.
You're going to have to do the Senate hearing of vote.
Really not used to saying that. Do you need your computer in front of you while you do it?
Guys, it's okay. I don't need it. He's going to kindergarten next fall, so
I need it.
I mean,
Sure, you can sit there and do it.
I can tell they're talking to me. I need to do challenges.
Where are you going to be your computer? I mean, you'll be on. Very. Because he loves it, so
Ready? Good morning, everyone. I am officially calling the meeting of the K-3 Literacy Ad Hoc Committee open and to start, and I think we're going to begin with roll call.
Member Burke.
Present.
Member Canto.
Present.
Member Castro.
Present.
Chair Clark.
Here.
Dr. Cruz.
present.
Dr. Foley. Member Garundo.
Here.
Member Hamilton. Member Hart.
Here.
Member McMillie.
Present.
Dr. Ortiz.
Here.
Member Reff.
Here.
Member Vickman.
Present.
Member Wellborn.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have any call
Chairwoman
to the public?
Clark.
Yes.
There are no call to the public's request forms received.
Excellent. Then we'll go to the next item, which we're very excited to have on the docket, and is going to be a presentation and allow us to have some discussion over the Education Commission of the State's K-3 Quality Initiative. And we are so pleased to have you here, Dawn. So thank you for making the time.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to start out with a couple of things, if I can. My name is Dawn Wallace. I'm the advisor to the Governor on Education and Strategic Initiatives. First, you're going to hear about a team that we put together to work on a project with the Education Commission of the States. I'm a member of that team, as are a few people on this committee, and And I will tell you that they sent the weakest link down here to make the presentation. So forgive me, and I appeal to my fellow team members to help me out when I'm not quite there. Secondly, I apologize for these colors. You will see this presentation has many colors. This is an attempt to have work-life balance. I have a 10-year-old who wanted to spend time with me, and she asked if she could help find the template for my presentation. So it's a little bright, and it's a little bit too much for the morning, but she's learning Google Slides and stuff at school, and so we're trying to be encouraging. How do I work this? You just click? Okay. So again, I apologize. So as we talk about early literacy, I think it's important for me. I'm a representative of Governor Ducey. I'm here on his behalf. We started this effort because the governor believes very strongly that the key to future success is determined very early in a child's educational career with early literacy. His focus certainly has been on the B20 spectrum, but when you talk to him and ask him where do you think the strongest metric that we have in terms of measuring future success in education, he will tell you literacy. It's something he believes very strongly in. It was the impetus for our office adopting the Arizona Education Progress Meter, which are a set of common metrics that you all are familiar with, and if you aren't, the lovely lady from Expect More will give you a tutelage on that. But we feel very strongly that reading by third grade is the first really significant marker, and the governor has encouraged our team and myself to collaborate with partners who are also engaged in this work to try to find ways to improve our strategies and to get that third grade reading goal up in terms of actual results. We do have the third grade reading mandate. However, as good as that has been to spark attention and concentration on literacy, we still have a long way to go. So we embarked, the Helios Education Foundation, Dr. Ortiz is on the phone, Janice Palmer is not on the phone, but she's here in spirit. We have had several public-private partnerships with them over the years, and we really wanted to do something together as it related to literacy. And so an opportunity came to us from the Education Commission of the States. If you're not familiar with that organization, it's a nonprofit think tank. It focuses on education from, as Terry has taught me now, from birth to workforce, and they tend to take on sort of big issues in education that have national significance. Their intention is to look at using best practices and what other states have done to bring together a set of recommendations that will help all states tackle what are common issues in their education system. So they are, like I said, an organization. We, the governor's office, partnered with Helios Education Foundation to apply for a grant specifically on the K-3 continuum with a focus on quality in those grades and a focus on literacy. As with anything that we do, it's important to bring all of your partners in. And so as a part of that grant application, we asked first things first, Arizona Grantmakers Forum, which represents the Arizona Early Childhood Alliance, Expect More, Read On, I didn't capitalize R, don't be mad at me, Terry, and Arizona Department of Education. Because these are all really important organizations doing the work, and we knew that we needed to have collaboration because it's with anything else, if you have a desire to move the needle, you need to have everyone working towards the same goal. So these are our partners in that application, and we were chosen as one of 5 states to work on what would be a strategic plan to make recommendations on improvements that we can make in that K-3 space that would not only get us where we wanted to be from a literacy track, but also having the students prepared to learn the content in 4th grade. Kindergarten preparedness, early learning opportunities to 4th grade reading to learn. So that was sort of our focus. However, the students that we were focusing on birth to 8, because that's the continuum we were focused on. As you can see, these organizations represent work that's being done in that 0 to 8 space. And I don't know how to, oh, God, let me check. What did I do? There you go. So we had 3 objectives, and so what we did is we convened representatives from all these groups, and Terry from Read On, Dr. Cruz, it was your predecessor, Dr. Lippert, and Nicole. Then afterwards, Aaron, I think you and Christine were part of it. Dr. Ortiz, Janice, and Lori Lyles from the Arizona Grantmakers Forum, and Michelle Katona from First Things First. And we got together and we created essentially for the application a framework of what we wanted to accomplish as part of this strategic plan. And certainly our main focus, and I will be very, very forthcoming with you, the governor's desire to see our 3rd grade reading metric improve. You know, we set the goal of 72% by 2030. We all, I think, can acknowledge that our cut scores are not in line with wanting to hit that metric. And so we do need to look at, and we will strongly be advocating for phasing in over time an increase to proficiency, because we are not at proficiency in our cut scores currently. And we are dismally below proficiency, as was discovered and highlighted during our work on A through F. Secondly, which is probably the most important piece of this, is developing the support systems and the funding and the public engagement and the branding and all of that to encourage public awareness that literacy is and must be a tremendous focus, not just within our schools, but in the home and in the communities, and just as a discussion of public policy. Certainly as we look at how teachers are prepared for the classroom, certainly how administrators and school leaders focus the interventions and the focus on it in the school. And finally, because we want to align our 3rd grade reading goal with what we really want to accomplish post K-12, which is that we have prepared our students for college and career. I mean, that is essentially what our literacy goal is intended to do, is to prepare students to learn and to learn the content that's necessary to prepare them for the next step post-secondary. So we wanted to create a good connection between the work we were doing and Achieve 60AZ, which is another one of our education progress meter goals, is the last one, which is how many of our students are we prepared and sending on to post-secondary education with the desire and the intention of getting some sort of degree or certificate. And without getting too much into that goal, I will say that 70% of our jobs in the next decade will require a degree or credential. So it's not a matter of do I want to, it's a matter of do I want to work, because that's what it will require. Now, these are jobs that are above livable wage. They promote a quality of life, and certainly they can be scaffolded so that you can have someone with a certificate that can ultimately lead to a degree in a field that they have the interest and the aptitude to be in. So these are our objectives as we move forward. So why Arizona? So we won the grant at one of 5 states. They were very impressed with us because despite what we believed to be that we were behind the ball a bit, because our proficiency scores were tough. They're sometimes tough to see. They thought we were actually much more advanced than other states because we have a 3rd grade reading mandate. We have the progress meter goals, the common goals that were approved and accepted and continue to be advocated for by all of the organizations involved in work around literacy and language. Plus, the state board has adopted the progress meter goals, which includes third grade reading as part of their strategic plan, and the ESSA plan that was submitted 2 years ago to the federal government required for the first time for the states to have sort of a forward-thinking strategic plan. And since the progress meter goals were already established, supported by the community, and were being funded and resourced, they chose it. So as you can imagine, we have what many states don't have is a cohesive community of parties who are interested in furthering the quality of education in the state all around the same goals. We additionally have included K-8 accountability metrics. So as you know, in our A through F system in K-8, we have third grade reading proficiency, and we have chronic absenteeism, two of the big pieces of where we think we need to be focused. And ultimately, we have ridiculously strong business support for literacy in this state, whether it be the individuals who are focused on full-day kindergarten and know that literacy is an important component of that, or it's just the notion that and that it's gotten to the business community that early learning is a predictor of skilled labor, and that appeals to them certainly from a marketplace perspective. I'll go kind of quickly. So as we convened this team, this ECS Arizona team, we came up with short-term priorities and we came up with long-term priorities, all of which are important. These are not in any specific order other than we believe that we can achieve the short-term priorities fairly quickly. Now, this allows, and if I can step back here, I think the reason that we're being asked to present is because you're doing similar work as part of this committee. We want to provide you with the opportunity to look at what we have done over the last 18 months, and if because it's a shared focus. We can help you with these recommendations, at least start your own framework in terms of where you might like to put your attention and your focus. So this is a little bit of not reinventing the wheel, because we've been engaged in this work, not in a formal way, but certainly through an application. And all of you represent different organizations that are impacted or do this work. We tried very, very hard to make sure that we did the same in the composition of our team. So first, short-term priority. And this is a collective set of recommendations from all of the folks who are involved. First and foremost, we need more aligned and consistent early childhood policy documents. What we determined as all these organizations sat in a room is that everybody had their own version of guidance and how information was being communicated to the field. That's sometimes confusing. Certainly, a nomenclature becomes confusing, but also when you have multiple documents, you're less likely to be able to communicate out similarly messaged information. So if you have one document that everyone accepts as being useful as we try to advocate and further strategies in early education and literacy, having that be consistent among all of the folks doing work, it proves helpful. So we have some strategies that we've outlined. First, we think that it's important to look at all of the significant documents that are produced, guidance, standards, anything that's out there by any organization that's trying to do work in this space, and see what we can, what we can capture from each to make a solidified document that could be a work product that's used by all, that's efficient, not only in terms of how you communicate, but cost, and certainly how you brand and communicate out to the field. Secondly, identifying the purpose and seeing if things can be consolidated. Again, that's an efficiency measure. We really believe that the State Board of Education and the Arizona Early Childhood Alliance can be a key partner in this effort. Obviously, from a communication perspective, the State Board of Ed is tasked with policymaking in the area of P12 instruction. Certainly, this is a great place to showcase that work and to bring stakeholders together, gather input, and produce a document. And when I say the State Board of Education, I mean obviously in collaboration with the Arizona Department of Education. ADE is the administrative arm of this board, and they're very critical in terms of expertise and support. Finally, utilizing all the early childhood education partners to communicate. Now, why is that important? You'll see the theme of communication throughout our entire presentation, because it became very clear to us that in order to gather the support we need and the community engagement that we need to communicate better about what we want our systems to look like, and expect more. I'd like to compliment Expect More. I mean, their whole mission is around how do you take public policy issues and find a way to make it simple enough for the public to want to advocate for. And that's what we need to do in early ed and in literacy. We need to find, and it's not easy. You're all, I can look and see most of you are practitioners. I imagine if I told you that teaching someone how to read is super easy, you would probably laugh me out of the room. It's not. It's complicated, and it's a science. And so to the extent that we need to engage parents at birth to start the process of literacy, to even promoting that into the older ages, to the high school ages, middle school ages, so that we can continue that focus on reading to learn, gets us to college and career preparedness. Our second short-term priority, and I've already spoken to this, is developing a plan to phase in and increasing the cut scores for the third grade reading assessments. I don't think I need to tell you much about this, but what I do think that everyone needs to understand is I don't believe that we could ever go from where we are to proficiency in 1 year. And if anyone tells you so, I would be highly suspect. We can't do that to our kids. We can't do that to our teachers. But we do believe that we can work on figuring out what that phase-in would look like to proficiency, and then building the support systems that we need around it. We have significant amounts of resources invested in Move On When Reading and the literacy plans. How do we focus all of that work around this? Because I am a very, very sort of upfront person, I will tell you this is something the governor will want to see done. The state board, I think, has already touched on this a little bit, and I think that they're aware that this is the next step to getting to where we want to go in our third grade reading goal. Now, how that happens is about thoughtful, meaningful discussion and discourse, and it's not intended to be a 1 year deal. So again, this is the purview of this committee. We look to you to find a way to create a process where we can get that thoughtful conversation happening through the state board. The state board has the authority to make those cut scores decisions themselves, but they look to you all for those recommendations. We hope that you will gather stakeholder input beyond the people in this room, to the public, to the parents, to other educators, to higher education, to community, to business, to nonprofit sector. We recognize that we need sort of a multifaceted plan. We certainly need to address how we're going to build the policies to support our students who are naturally disadvantaged in that they are either special ed or English language learner in terms of them needing extra supports and so forth to get to their proficiency levels. And certainly we need to figure out how we're going to help students in the context of setting a higher bar and expectation, how we're going to help students who are still not able to be proficient, and what we're going to do for those that are retained or those who are not retained but still need extra support. That's the decision, and the cut scores are one thing, but how we're going to help provide the targeted interventions and the guidance to schools and teachers and administrators is probably the hardest part about this and it cannot be done in isolation. Increasing early learning opportunities. Again, that's a intuitive part of early literacy. Is the sooner the students are given access to a quality early learning environment, the better they are in kindergarten preparedness. I don't need to tell you all that. I will go through this fairly quickly. Most of you are familiar with the preschool development grant that's existing. Dr. Cruz, I'm going to leave it to you if the committee has questions, because that's your area. But we are currently preparing the grant application for the next iteration of the PDG, and I really appreciate the Department of Education being open to focusing the work in that grant to early literacy and the coordination and alignment of all of the systems that are on that continuum. Again, within the work that we've done through the K-3 Quality Initiative, the Department of Education has really built that in to what they want the grant to look like. And of course, ultimately, our goal is to increase access to quality and early learning. That can happen certainly through the curriculum, but I think we all know that it rests sort of on the shoulders of the educators. And so we need to do more in terms of professional development and engagement with our educators in that space. Finally, increasing resources and opportunity for the kindergarten developmental inventory and formative assessment tool. So one of the things that's very interesting to me as an observer is that we do a lot of, we have a statewide assessment for 3 through 12, or 11 now, 3 through 12? 12, yes. But, quite frankly, we leave sort of the assessing to the locals for K through 3. And that's fine, except that we don't have a means to collect that data and use it to help from a statewide perspective, from a predictive tool. The Department of Education is engaged in their second year of a voluntary pilot program that has implemented this KDI, for short, an assessment that is, in my layman's terms, basically a holistic evaluation of a child's preparedness for the kindergarten year. Now, that doesn't mean that assessment is given necessarily only in kindergarten. It can be done in a pre-K environment to assess whether or not the student has areas or gaps that the kindergarten teacher needs to be aware of, or that can be mitigated through pre-K. But it is really the alternative to the fabulous Dibbles test that I think has and is in use in all of our schools. I'll give you, it's common knowledge. I understand the phonics element of Dibbles, and I understand why that's important. But I will tell you, it serves no value to a parent at all in terms of understanding where their child has gaps. And again, from our perspective, literacy is as much of a public awareness issue as anything else we do in education, why it's important. And when you hand a nonsense test over to a parent and say your child may be in jeopardy of not reading at third grade level, figure it out, that's a problem. Ultimately, we use assessments for instructional improvement. So it's probably better for us to look at an assessment in those early grades that's much more about the whole child than just one aspect of language. We do need to evaluate that pilot. If you all want more information about the status of that, I think Dr. Cruz, you're much more in the know on where we are. But if it is a tool that is useful, we will need to look at how we can allow schools to use that on an ongoing basis through legislative authority. So we have some long-term priorities, and I'll go through these pretty quickly. Again, assessments need to be used for instructional improvement. As we were discussing this, it was really clear from all the organizations and their work in the field that while schools have at their fingertips good quality assessments, formative assessments. They're not always used well. And so we want to try to find a way to communicate how formative assessments can be used. Again, I go back to parents and people in the community that are interested in the issue. And we need to use those assessments to help teachers prepare not so much prepare, but to develop strategies that they need when they identify areas where students need additional attention. Just as a sidebar, I had a parent-teacher conference last night, and I was handed an NWEA map results, and you see, the progress of your child over 5 years. You see all the areas that they're strong in. They identify which areas they're not, and then they tie it back. I had an excellent English language arts instructor who could tie it back to the curriculum and assure me that, my child was not going to flunk the 5th grade because she wasn't great at vocabulary right now because they haven't concentrated on sophisticated text. And so the fact that not only was she able to use that assessment to really create an individualized perspective on my child, and to convince me that she knew my child differently than the 30 other children in that class, was owing to a quality assessment that could help her identify that to someone who maybe doesn't know as much about this stuff as maybe I might or one of you might when you're dealing with teachers. Alleviating the quality disparity between move on when reading plans. There's no question that exists. It is somewhat of a common phenomenon when you're dealing with school systems. There's some that are sophisticated. There's some that are not. There's some that have really excellent talent working in that space in their schools, and there are some that aren't quite there. But what we can do from the Department of Education's perspective is to look at making a more consistent, uniform literacy plan template. Last session, there were some changes made in statute that made that a little bit easier. It also provided the Department of Ed the opportunity to take best practices from those literacy plans and use that to provide intentional support and guidance to districts that are struggling in this area. That is key. The reason we collect data, the reason we collect qualitative information is to create an inventory of best practices so that we can then use it. Otherwise, data for the collection of data is just a data system. It's not an evaluation tool. Supporting the continued distribution of Move On When Reading guidance documents. Again, this goes back to our literacy plans. Having the department engage in more technical assistance and focus with our struggling schools, how the best practices that they extrapolate from the literacy plans of our highly performing systems, how they can be used to provide support and intentional interventions and improvement plans. And finally, ultimately, developing a way of a communication strategy to bring everybody sort of in line with the same messaging as they talk about Move On When Reading and what its impact is to the community. And I'm going to make this go faster. Again, strengthening quality professional development opportunities. There's no question that that the teacher is the center of the classroom, and to what degree we need to look at what's currently offered to our teachers in this area and what we need to do to develop more opportunities, whether that comes from a local perspective or from a statewide perspective. One of the best underappreciated departments in the Arizona Department of Education is the Professional Development Office. They have an excellent portal for professional development. It's not often marketed and used, but But ultimately, if we had a more rigorous professional development platform at the state, we could alleviate some of the costs and concerns that locals have in terms of providing quality professional development. The First Things First is also working on this issue. So I think that the goal of our team was to try to put all the recommendations together. Certainly, this becomes your purview, and I think, with all the folks represented here, this is something that can absolutely be addressed. And codifying the results of information and data. So the thing about any sort of policy work, and it's existed through time, is as long as the person's there to do the work, there's institutional knowledge. A lot of this work is done by individual organizations where the work is, sort of dependent on who's in the chair. And so what we're recommending is that we find ways, and I think Read On has done that to some degree through your mapping system, where we're collecting data around the results that we have for birth to 8 for literacy, and we're creating a longitudinal system so that we can actually see ebbs and flows, we can see trends, we can see regionalization. I mean, one of the things that's really shocking to me that we don't think about more is that educational success and student achievement does have a trend in geography. There's certain areas of the state where consistently we do well, and there are certain parts of the state where it's never been good. And so when you don't have the data to support it, it's just anecdotal, and that's never got us really good public policy change. And then finally, chronic absenteeism. I know that the State Board has done some work defining the term. We have it in our A through F system. Read On has an extensive partnership with Attendance Works on data and best practice. I don't think enough people, the public, know what a strong correlation there is to a low rate of chronic absenteeism and student achievement and success, particularly in early grades. I will share with you, when I talk about the governor's focus on third grade, this notion of trying to, this strategy of trying to increase student achievement through attendance is second in the governor's focus around getting to where we need to go. It's actually an issue that spans sort of a broader political spectrum. People can agree that if you're not there, you're not going to learn. And educators will tell you, if I can just get them in my classroom, I can teach them. But I have to have them here. And so there's a lot of work that we can do here, and that's why we fought hard to put chronic absenteeism in A through F. It's one of the few non-academic indicators, and we feel like it was an important part of the K-8 accountability system. Probably give me way more time than I deserve, but I'm happy to answer any questions. We're so excited that you're doing this work. It feels like a continuation of what we spent a long time trying to do. The State Board's been very supportive of us. I cannot tell you how important it is for us to get that third grade reading goal to where we need it to be. It will be a domino effect on everything else. This is a stat, and I'm here to tell you because I work in state government and I know this to be true. We do absolutely decide how many prison beds we're building every year based on our state's literacy rates. It's one indicator. It's not the only one, but it is. And so when you solve this problem, whether you know it or not, you're solving a lot of other problems. So thank you so much for the time. Again, send the weakest link. She talks the most. But thank you very much, State Board Committee, and all of you who had to listen. Do you have any? Oh.
Do we have any questions for Dawn? Member Wilburn?
Don, it's really great to know that the scope of this is an excellent plan, and I think it really helps to focus the work that we're going to be doing, so I really appreciate that. I want to go back to one of your slides where you're talking about increasing the cut scores, and two of the bullet points there talk about creating a plan to target policy and resources to close the achievement gap, and the second one was to focus policy and resources on students who score below proficient. As you're aware, right now the funding that we have for the Maurer program goes to every single student, every single school in the state. And an argument can be made that there are some schools that have a bigger challenge and a higher percentage of their kids that are in minimally proficient have a bigger challenge with achievement gaps than others. Has there ever been any discussion or thought about targeting the funds closer to where the need is rather than just give everybody the same amount of funding?
Well, Madam Chair, Ms. Wellborn, I think there's been conversations about it. I guess I'm of two minds on this. Number one, I don't believe that every school that has an A rating has 100% of their students at proficient levels. And so I feel to some degree that the aggregate, the way that we look at things on an aggregate basis makes us lose sight of the fact that it's the sum of its parts, and there are children who continue to benefit from the resources that that school provides. Additionally, part of the value of those resources is that those schools that are at performing, whether they're low income or high income or whatever category you want to put them in, we can't lose sight of the fact that they have used those dollars in a way that has caused good results. So not as the purpose of funding a particular program is to incentivize through best practices and through intentional focus to use resources to get to the results that you want. Having said that, I also recognize that when we are dealing with our students who are in more challenging communities, who are struggling communities, who have additional challenges just beyond their academics, that they require additional levels of support. There's no question. That's why we have Title I programs and we have other improvement strategies. So I recognize the two. I don't think that I'm prepared to say one or the other, but I do think that that's a conversation to be had. But I don't want to have it at the expense of children in what would be perceived as performing schools being losing out on the opportunity to get these resources. My daughter goes to an A-rated school, and I can tell you that there's not a universal 100% proficiency rate in that school, and the children who are there who need it. So it's one of those things that I think we need to talk about, but I don't think I'm prepared to eliminate funding to school systems that are performing because they're performing. That seems counterintuitive to incentive using financial resources and incentive to do so. But I'm not elected and I'm not on the committee, so I think it's a worthy debate, Ms. Wellborn.
Can I just thank you, Dawn? We just have one technical issue. We have the folks on the phone have lost sound, so they didn't get to hear that wonderful answer that in question. So I think you want them to hang up and call back in, or?
Yes, Chair Clark. If we could have them hang up and call back in, I'm opening the line right now.
All right. I don't know how they're going to know, except for the one that let me know they couldn't hear. The others, you might have to contact them, because they won't hear us telling them to do that.
So we can hang up and call back.
Yes.
If you want to send a line, I can let you know when they, I guess that's how that can work. They said to hang up and call back in, but they'll give me I'll get the heads up.
That's Carrie Miller. Yes, Carrie, hang up and call back in. I will let, the only one that won't know is Carmen, if we could contact her.
She's talking to all the, I'm talking to Carrie via text, that she's with them on the line, so.
Perfect. So you're letting them know. Hang up, call back in. Thank you. Sorry about that little technical glitch that will, and I think just to add to your comment, the governor and your office was very instrumental in the literacy grant, the early literacy grants that went to those LEAs that were supporting high number of free and reduced lunch students, and part of the hope there was that those were additional resources that they then could use because of the need that those schools have. Although I think there's room to say that there's an assumption that a number of those schools have the most minimally proficient, and the news is that the minimally proficient are spread throughout A to F schools. It isn't that there's a high degree of concentration from what we're seeing in the data. So we would want to maybe think about what would be a more tactical way to make sure that the schools that get support that are really trying to move the most minimally proficient, how can we make sure that they have all the resources they need to do that? And we don't have the answer, I think, is what Dawn's saying, and what I think, but maybe we can think about what that might look like.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think that with the mapping system that you have, and we can identify where we have our strongest schools and where we have those that need support. I can't believe we forgot that funding in my brain. We fought so hard for it.
You did.
We fought really hard at the legislature. We initially attempted to have those dollars available for preschool and pre-K. Unfortunately, it didn't quite get there at the legislature. But yeah, I mean, 90% schools, free and reduced lunch. Our focus was really to try to build full-day kindergarten programs where they didn't exist, and or where they did exist, those dollars could be used for coaching and for interventions and for compensatory instruction, all the things, all the strategies that you all would say are needed for the students who are not proficient. So we can do more. We can build resources. I think there's a general, and I'll just be I think that unless we can show the value of those resources and how we can target them better, I think that the appropriators, might not necessarily be persuaded that additional dollars dumped into the system will help. But if they're more targeted and they're focused and they're around strategies that are best practice, I think that plays a little bit into it as well.
Yes, Audrey.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much I do see there are very many practitioners around the table, so I'm happy to see that, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. This is something that has been near and dear to my heart for a long time, and I've studied it extensively, and I would agree with Member Wellborn that this funding issue is something that I think that we need to have a long discussion about, because a per pupil weight, I believe it's $150, maybe $200, I'm not sure, per pupil, being of taxpayer money going to a school where there are a handful of students who are not meeting benchmarks, how that makes sense to apply that per pupil weight times all of the K-3 students in that school, as opposed to providing resources for schools where we've got 75, 80, 90% of kindergartners showing up on the first day not prepared for kindergarten, who need extra support. So targeting those dollars just seems to make sense from a taxpayer perspective. And also if we look at what is the goal of this policy? Have we really clearly defined who exactly are the kids and where are they living, like you pointed out, geographically? What do we know about them who are not meeting these benchmarks? Because it seems to me in this legislation that we're applying this broad policy prescription across every student in the state, and every student in the state is very different and needs to be looked at differently and engaged with those. We need to engage with those communities, I believe, and those families more directly with a better understanding of what are the issues that we can apply these policy solutions. My question, as you were going through the goals, the idea of increasing the cut score, is that the same as increasing retention? So are you saying that we'll move from 3% retention to 20% retention?
No, Madam Chair, Superintendent
Ref?
I'm sorry.
Director of Federal Programs.
Okay. Increasing the proficiency scores from our perspective means that we're actually being honest about where our students are performing. Mm-hmm. We believe that the public, because we have a low retention rate, believes that our students are proficient. They can read at third grade level. So a third grader who is moved on to fourth grade and is minimally proficient is perceived as being a third grade reader. Mm-hmm. That's not honest. And it doesn't let us do our work. It doesn't let us do the hard work that you just referred to. We're not looking at the profile of the student. We're not looking at the geography. And it's not a criticism. I was here when the law was written. There's a certain amount of, you have to phase in these things. You have to sort of start where you think you can get buy-in and work your way up. And at the time, having a third grade reading mandate it was in like 2 other states, I think Florida and a couple of others. We were pioneers in that effort. If we had gone straight to proficiency without the resources, because the resources came several years later. Mm-hmm. So I would say that I believe ultimately it leads to student success and less retention because you're actually being honest about where students are. And quite frankly, the best thing about the reading mandate was that it forced a look back. It made it so that my daughter, when she was in her 3rd month of kindergarten, I got a note home that said, based on this Goofy Dibbles test, your daughter may not be reading at 3rd grade level because we use it as a predictor. Now, what do you think that did to me? And what do you think that did to the school? Because then the educator looked at my daughter, looked deep into my daughter, and saw, well, I could do this or do this. So there is a lot of value in what we did, but certainly when you set the expectation low and then the perception is that this is really this, I don't know if you can ever close the gap. So I guess I would say that I hope it leads to less retention because we're doing more for our students. But there is a possibility that, yes, when you raise the cut scores and that you can't move on to 4th grade, there may be cases that where students aren't being. But my feeling is that we as a state and through the state board have put enough opportunities in place where schools can work with that student over the summer or over the course of the 3 years to try to get that student prepared for 4th grade. And it maybe won't need to be retained. But I'm probably going beyond my expertise here.
I think we may have one other question. We'll go Angel and Dawn and then you.
That's fine. And it may be less of a question and more of a comment tagged to what Member Ruffus is discussing. And I'm probably of a mind of both. I look at the cut score and where it is presently because I meet with many parents in my role. And I understand that there are concerns about the message we could be communicating to them. However, I think that if we're going to consider that, then we definitely need to be, my opinion would be we need to be talking about some K-2 assessment results so we have some strong preliminary data versus now comes a hard cut score and there's an issue there if there could be disconnects. Absolutely. And then tied to that, I'm looking at when this first began, this was under the assumption we have a state assessment. I don't know that I'm reassured that in a year that will be the case. And so the menu of assessments where we're all choosing very different things in 3rd grade give me concerns about this process, and then that's complicated by the lack of perhaps what I think is a strong K-2 assessment system. So those would just be some comments and less of a question.
I do think that we have some significant work to do if we are to move to a menu of assessments in the elementary grades. And that's not a statement for or against. That just, it's a different animal than the high school assessment. So I acknowledge what you're saying.
Great.
So this is probably more for Member Cruz. In regards to the PG grant and the process that you're writing, is there going to be some acknowledgement or trigger points to how these programs are relating and working with the transitioning school district or schools, and or are there's consideration to the ones that are doing KDI at the kindergarten, first or second grade level? And the reason I ask that is because I've been out in the field and talking to some of the schools that are doing the KDI and just asking questions and seeing what it's like. And it was very interesting when they started saying that when they had students that were already in a program and had data, what that looked like in comparison to starting from scratch. So I was wondering if there's any way that there's going to be some of that connection when you go into that grant system.
Let me make sure I'm on here. Thank you very much for that question. PDG 1, I'll just clarify, is very different than PDG 2. So we hope to build a system that looks back and hopes to keep in place some of the very, very good things that are in place now with PDG 1. For instance, thousands of slots for children in quality learning systems, where PDG 2 is a little bit different. So there will be a ton of stakeholders from around this table that, should we be awarded, will be a part of that planning year. And that's really what PDG 2 does, is they give you a whole year to plan, and then you have to reapply for the next level of the grant. So it's a little bit different structure than the first one. And we are hoping to keep all of those things in mind, because we would hate to go backwards in what we're doing with the state. We would like to do nothing more than increase spots for children. And there's a lot of other pieces to that grant, as well as, educators and getting them their certificates and bachelor's degrees, all of those things needed to ensure we have really high quality systems for our students. So thank you for that question.
Oh, thank you, because it is important to know that they're talking about that. And I think that the more positive we hear, the more we'll see us all aligning together.
Absolutely.
And that's what we need.
And I can just wrap up then, if you like. I think that this group needs to be very, very thoughtful about what we're doing, and I'll echo what Dawn brought us today, that there could be several unintended consequences were we to make a decision of, well, you're in a school and you don't have any children that aren't proficient, or we want to incentivize good behavior, right? Not that educators are out doing poor behavior, but knowing that, funding is at the level that it is, you wouldn't want to erase any resources that schools and districts are now incredibly dependent upon for their program. I would maybe say that we should look at the plan to graduate these in, but along with the aligned resources and support, and helping to build the system that supports all of that across our state, so that we can start to really point to some things and say, wait, we know we can ensure that kids are going to be reading because of X, Y, and Z, and those supports to put in place for our teachers and even our administrators that lead those programs, which that's a critical piece that we don't talk about that very often. It's crucial for our state and our system.
Member Clark, Chairman Clark?
Yes, Karen.
Hello. Thank you. Madam Chair and members of the committee, I just want to state, working with ECS gives us the opportunity for next steps. Don has presented the PowerPoint about the strategies and whatnot that we've been able to identify to date. In working with ECS for next steps as to how to do it, and being able to coordinate with other states, like Florida and others involved in this, will ensure support that all of us are identifying are there. And we need to be honest that we need to do right by our students, and looking at how other states have done it and are moving forward through the work of ECS will give us that opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Ortiz. Audrey, last comment, because we have overstayed Dawn's.
Yeah, sorry, thank you, and I appreciate it. Just this idea that I'm hearing a lot about in terms of not wanting to remove resources that are already in place and being allocated for good purposes at schools, and I totally agree and understand with that. But I still feel like we've got work to do there in understanding exactly the impact of these dollars. So if what I think I hear you saying is that because of K-3 funding, per pupil funding, the way it's being allocated now, we've seen an impact in all schools. Does ADE have data that shows what the proficiency level of third grade students were pre and post policy? So that we can see, are we really seeing schools who were 90% proficient pre-move on in reading? Now they've got dollars. Are they now 100%? I mean, I don't know what that would look like, but I know that there's interest from the Auditor General's office about the impact of these funds and this policy and these resources.
You want to talk about that, Heather?
I can. Thank you. That's an excellent question, and certainly we should always stay close to our metrics. However, there are a number of variables that have changed over the last several years. We have new standards. We have a new assessment. We're getting ready to change the assessment again. So when we talk about comparing apples to apples, you know, at some point we need to put something in place that's going to allow us to truly do that and look at the trajectory.
Excellent point, and thank you. All right, you're the last. No, you guys are making me go.
I'm so sorry, but
I've lost control.
And embracing all of those ideas. I think it's essential too that when we talk about raising that cut score, that we talk about on what test, on what measure, and what information is that giving back to us as we take a look at a lot of variables there. That supports that information that would be essential in making that determination.
Okay. So on behalf of the whole committee, we want to thank you for making time and presenting this and putting forth this framework as an opportunity to share and work together. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate the work you've been doing, Dawn, and the work you've been leading. So thank you.
Thank you. And I can't say enough about folks like you who are willing to give their time away from your regular jobs to do this type of work. It's really undervalued for us here at the state. We have such experts out in the field, and we're so grateful to have you here. And thank you very much. And I hope Alicia's treating you all very well. If she's not, you can call me.
All right. So we're moving on to item number 3. Am I correct?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Chairwoman Clark.
So that is
Wonder Woman Clark. I feel like that.
Wonder Woman Clark.
Chairwoman Clark. I believe that Carrie Miller is on the line, and she, ExcelinEd was so gracious to create this PowerPoint for us. We had some issues with finding out the follow-ups from this committee's questions from our last meeting, and ExcelinEd stepped in and are helping us out where they can. So thank you to Alex and Carrie for making this work for us today. Carrie, are you on the line?
Good morning, yes.
Okay. I'm throwing it off to you. Do you need us to help you go through the slides then?
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
Okay.
First and foremost, thank you all. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for having me today to talk to you a little bit about a handful of states that are doing honestly very similar work and that Arizona is doing under the Move On Reading Initiative. Again, my name is Carrie Miller. I'm the Policy Director for Early Literacy here at the Foundation. A little bit about me. I started actually as a teacher. I taught third grade for 6 years. Went on to have the opportunity to work for Just Read Florida at the onset of Just Read Florida initiative, which is basically our former governor, Governor Bush, established Just Read Florida. It's been over a decade ago. Which was the office that was responsible for implementing reading policy as a whole, but specifically started with the K-3 reading policy in Florida. So again, I'm going to just share, I've been asked to share about some state action, if you will, in respect to K-3 reading policy across our nation, and completely open for questions or anything you have to add to the conversation as we progress through the presentation. two things you should possibly have in front of you. I'm not sure, but I do have the slide deck, which, again, Alicia's going to help with moving me along, if you will. And then you also should have a state-by-state analysis document that kind of gives you an overview of any state in the nation that has some form of K-3 reading policy. I think there's roughly 35 states that have some form of K-3 reading policy on the books in legislation, and you will see that reflected in that state-by-state analysis document. But from there, I'm going to go ahead and jump in on the states in which we're going to highlight today. Go ahead to slide 2, if you could. We're going to start with Florida. Florida, I tend to refer to it as mothership of this K-3 reading policy, only because they started it a number of years ago. Florida's policy consists of 4 buckets of work, or 4 buckets of policy, if you will. The first bucket is focused on assessment and parent notification. Florida enacted a universal statewide early literacy screening and progress monitoring tool that was used statewide to identify students that may have reading difficulties. It also serves as a tool to better inform instruction for our kiddos across the state. Any student identified with a reading deficiency, parents were informed immediately and brought into the process to form a plan, if you will, for intervention services and support for that particular student, starting as early as kindergarten, starting as early as they're identified. That process is kind of in the form of what we call individual reading plans in Florida. The individual reading plan basically prescribes the intervention services and supports that will be provided above and beyond what's typically provided for your general ed student to ensure they're getting the services and supports they need to become successful readers. Some of those components of the individual reading plan include also having tips for parents so they can support literacy in the home as well. Also monitoring student progress more regularly, and for any student in 3rd grade that is still having some difficulties in reading, there's a requirement for summer reading camps for those students to give them additional time, extended learning opportunities for them to catch up and be successful on the skills needed for 4th grade. The 3rd bucket for Florida is supports. Which I feel as though is probably the most important bucket when thinking about passing or implementing a K-3 reading policy. Some of the supports that Florida put in place include statewide training on the science of reading, also database decision-making using that universal statewide reading screener and progress monitoring tool. And I think the probably most powerful component of the supports provided is in the form of reading coaches, allowing reading coaches to provide job-embedded professional development on-site with schools, with teachers, so teachers can really build their ability, their knowledge about reading and how to teach reading, their skill set on how to actually teach students of all needs, right? Any student that, in respect to their specific reading needs. I feel as though this is probably one of the major components of Florida's policy and why Florida was so successful on the onset of their policy. Another area of support was focusing on teacher preparation programs. Teacher candidates were expected to have the knowledge and skill to teach reading for all students when they exited the teacher preparation program in the state of Florida. We'll talk about some of those things they did to put in place to make that happen. And then funding. Funding is another major component and also obviously part of the conversation when we're talking about K-3 reading policies. First and foremost, Florida took a look at what existing pots of funds they had to reprioritize, to focus on early literacy efforts under this policy. And then there's new money applied if indeed new money is needed to effectively implement the policy. The last bucket is your retention bucket, which y'all are familiar with. It's basically retention for students severely below grade level that truly need additional year of intensive intervention services to catch up and be successful in 4th grade curriculum. Ensuring that one test on one day is not the sole determining factor. In the state of Florida, they use an alternative assessment, the statewide assessment, and a portfolio option for students that may have difficulty with testing environments. There's also good cause exemptions that are applied for some students, recognizing the special needs of some. And lastly, retention means more intensive intervention with a highly effective teacher. I do believe Arizona, actually, I do know Arizona most recently focused on bumping up a little bit more intensified interventions for their retained kiddos. If you turn to slide 3, it just shows some examples of what that intensified intervention services and support looks like for retained students. For students in kindergarten through 3rd grade, those intervention services and supports are created and delineated in the individual reading plan that's created in collaboration with the parent that I alluded to earlier. If you turn to slide 4, I think probably one of the most important slides for all states that I'm going to highlight today is that a policy is only as good as its implementation. And so here are the main buckets of focus in the state of Florida on slide 4 that really we believe is why Florida was so successful, especially the first 8 years of implementation. It starts with leadership. We had executive branch support down, and an office was established strictly to implement, starting with the K-3 reading policy, and that was the Just Read Florida office. We had such executive branch support down, and that Governor Bush at the time would create weekly press releases about the actions that were taken to ensure kiddos were on the right track to grade level proficiency by the end of 3rd grade. The second bucket you see is a statewide comprehensive assessment, so a universal screening and progress monitoring tool was enacted to ensure we're identifying kids and giving them the services and supports they need based on those results. We had educator and parent training, statewide training for educators, and statewide training for parents. The expectation was that assessment, instruction, curriculum all align with the science of reading, so focused on scientifically based reading instruction intervention in our classrooms through all our trainings as well. There was extended learning opportunities, again, before and after school for students that needed more time and more support, as well as summer reading camps for 3rd grade students. One thing that isn't done through policy but done through partnerships is the business community aspect and how everyone can come to the table and provide support and raise awareness of the importance of literacy. And lastly, funding. With Florida, there was zero funding that was tied to this policy when it was first enacted. So there was much work done to reprioritize existing funds to ensure supports were provided to all educators to effectively implement the policy. A couple of examples, there was a reprioritization of dropout prevention funds. In the past, the dropout prevention funds went directly to districts, and districts determined how they could use those funds to ensure students would graduate from high school. And what occurred, and I think literally one stroke of a pen, one sentence, that reprioritized that pot of funds to be first and foremost spent on summer reading camps for 3rd grade students, and then district discretion from that point forward in respect to the policies and programs they put in place to prevent dropout. Another example would be there was a need for assessment. So working with the assessment office, there was reprioritization of assessment funds to provide diagnostic assessments to schools that had a high level of students that were having difficulties in reading. So they provided diagnostic assessments free of charge to those particular students so they could diagnose students' specific reading needs, instruction accordingly. We move on to slide 5. This kind of gives you a little bit more detail of the action that occurred in the state of Florida to support educators and parents. Raising awareness was a huge factor in these activities, and raising the knowledge and skill of teachers to effectively teach all kids to read, including students with disabilities, including students with dyslexia. A couple of the components I want to point out on slide 5, under professional development and for teachers, the Just Read Florida Leadership Conference was a pretty powerful conference that no longer is provided. And the K-3 Reading Academies was statewide, trained over 30,000 teachers in the science of reading and database decision making. You're able to provide such training statewide because there was a consistent universal statewide literacy screener, so it helped drive the conversation and the discussion and the professional development for teachers. But I do want to point out that the first 8 years of this policy is where much of the statewide training took place. Since then, there's been a slow decrease in the providing professional development, and it truly is chalked up to the lack of leadership prioritizing reading, as well as less funds to actually make it happen. The other bullet I want to point out under professional development for teachers is reading coaches. Reading coaches were a key element to the early success of K-3 reading in the state of Florida. In 2006-2007, there was a reading allocation established, which actually was a reprioritization. It was existing funds. They just repackaged it and required K-12 reading plans. And in those K-12 reading plans, required reading coaches for your lowest performing schools. At this point is when the shift of coaching support changed, where we saw less coaches in K-3 reading and more coaches at our secondary level. So I think there's been a shift in focus for K-3 reading in the state of Florida a little bit through that practice as well. The third bucket you see for teachers in the pipeline, here are some activities that were put in place in the state of Florida to ensure teacher candidates exited the teacher preparation program prepared to teach all kids to read. The second bullet you see is something that Arizona just recently passed as well, but increasing required reading courses in the College of Ed to focus on the science of reading and database decision making. And the last bucket you see here is funding. So as I shared earlier, when the policy first was passed in Florida, there were no funds tied to the implementation of this policy. However, at the time, there was a federal grant, the Reading First. Many of you may be familiar with the Reading First grant. Arizona was a state that had a Reading First grant as well. We were awarded that grant. And so this is really where the funding came to provide all the statewide training for all our teachers across the state. You'll see there was a 5% off the top to support state-level implementation, which include our assessment system, statewide professional development, a director, and 30 regional coordinators over time to support reading coaches in schools and Reading First schools. It also supported the FCR Research Center, nationally recognized center, that really supported us with creating our professional development and resources to provide to teachers that was based on the science of reading. And then 95% was granted to districts to fund a reading coach, curriculum, assessment, instruction, interventions aligned to the science of reading. Slide 6 shows you results. So in the state of Florida, 2002 is when the K-3 reading policy was passed. And you can see the results since 2002. You can see that we had drastic results the first 6 years of the policy, and then you see that it tapers off. Although you're still seeing progress, it definitely tapers off and slows down quite substantially. The next slide is just a little bit more data in respect to Florida on the NAEP. Most recently, on 2017, Florida students outperformed the national average in every subgroup for fourth grade reading, and I think the ones that really stand out to me are students with disabilities and our Hispanic students.
That's good.
Slide 8, moving on to Mississippi. Mississippi is one of the states newest to implementing a K-3 reading policy. Their policy is called the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. You will see there are a lot of similarities in Mississippi's Literacy-Based Promotion Act when compared to Florida, but there are some differences as well. So Mississippi, too, has a statewide early literacy assessment system, and theirs actually extends pre-K through grade 3. They recently moved to using STAR Early Literacy as their statewide early literacy assessment system. They also have a parent notification component. They also have individual reading plans that prescribe the intervention services and supports to be provided to kindergarten, first, second, and third grade students that are identified with a reading deficiency. You'll see the one thing Mississippi doesn't enact, but they leave it to district discretion, is providing summer reading camps for students that are struggling. In the supports bucket, they too provided statewide training, and I'll show you some examples of that here in a minute, as well as job-embedded training in low-performing schools via reading coaches in the state of Mississippi. Mississippi also, a couple years after they passed the Literacy-Based Promotion Act, added a component that requires teacher candidates to pass assessment, a reading test for certification. They just started that particular policy. I want to say the first year was 2017, and the expectation is that teachers have the knowledge and skill when they exit the program to be prepared to teach all kiddos to read when they enter the school system. Mississippi also has a retention component, some nuances in respect to the retention portion. Again, retention is for students severely below grade level that truly need an entire year of intensive intervention services to catch up. They most recently upped the bar for promotion. This upcoming school year, the expectation is for students to score 3 and above on their state assessment for promotion. And that leaves roughly predictions are around 22% of students that may be at risk of retention. And then, of course, there's good cause exemptions that are applied after that. Mississippi also ensures that one test on one day is not the sole determining factor. They have state tests as well as alternative test options, and they're able to take the alternative assessment twice for promotion. And lastly, retention does mean more intensive intervention with a highly effective teacher in Mississippi. On slide 9 are really the key components for effective policy implementation in the state of Mississippi. First and foremost, there are offices established specific to helping with implementation of this policy. You see them delineated on slide 9. There is also statewide literacy training provided for early childhood, K-3 teachers, kindergarten through 8th grade special education teachers, and elementary principals. These trainings were also provided regionally, so teachers could attend, as well as principals too. And then you'll see reading coaches. They have a specific reading coach model, which is very unique and different from the Florida model, and that their reading coaches actually work for the State Department of Education. And there's a prescriptive role in which they play, and they are provided extensive training in respect to their role and the supports in which they will provide to teachers. I would say Mississippi would probably chalk their reading coach model up to one of the reasons why they've been so successful to date in such a short time period as well. They also provide literacy resources. They awarded $3.8 million in literacy grants to 34 basically target schools, or support schools is what they refer to them now, for improving literacy instruction. And they've also launched a statewide literacy campaign called Strong Readers Equals Strong Leaders, and they're having a heavier emphasis on that this upcoming fall, really focusing on communicating more effectively about the policy and the changes of the increased cut score for proficiency or increased cut score for promotion. You'll see the funding that Mississippi has in respect to implementing this policy at the bottom of slide 9. Year 1 was $9.5 million, and years 2 through 6, $15 million per year to implement their policy statewide. I'm going to add that I think Mississippi also has been so successful in such a short period because they have unbelievable support executive branch down. Their governor and lieutenant governor are very supportive, and this is a priority within their state. And the superintendent, Dr. Carrie Wright, is very passionate about early childhood and early literacy, and she's made this a priority in the state. And that has to be noted. It's so greatly important to have leadership support down to make all of this happen and be successful with improving literacy amongst your state. Slide 10 is just a quick look at personnel in Mississippi at the State Department to make it all work and happen. I can move on from that unless there's any questions. And then lastly, results. So on slide 11, again, here are the results for the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. Third grade reading pass rate has increased annually since TEST was first administered in 2015. And the passing score, as I shared, is raised in 2018 to move closer to demonstrating proficiency. On slide 12, you'll see the results since the enactment of the policy. Knowing it's been a short time period and also knowing NAEP is only administered every 2 years, it gives us a little bit of glimpse of what's going on in Mississippi. Their state data mimics this. They've had great success on their state assessment data as well. But you see the year in which the Literacy-Based Promotion Act was enacted and the progress since. They basically increased 6 scale score points since the enactment of the policy. So another state I'm going to highlight is North Carolina. North Carolina's had the Read to Achieve program since 2012. Again, you'll see very similarities across Mississippi and Florida in respect to policy. So what you see on the slide is the policy that was passed in these states. North Carolina also has a universal statewide early literacy screener. They're in the process of actually have a request for proposal to select their new universal statewide literacy screener, so that could be changing here soon. Of course, they have the parent notification component. The one thing North Carolina does not have is individual reading plans that prescribe the intervention services and supports that students will receive, but they do require intervention supports and services to be provided to any student identified with a reading deficiency in kindergarten through third grade. A positive in North Carolina, and in addition to what we've seen in Florida and Mississippi, is the summer reading camps. In North Carolina, they've extended their summer reading camps. Originally, they were required for third grade students that had difficulties or were identified with a reading deficiency, and they've extended those and provided funding for them for grades 1st through 3rd grade struggling readers. Under the supports bucket, again, you'll see some similarities. In North Carolina, they do require a reading test for teachers to become certified to teach at the elementary level. And the one thing North Carolina doesn't have is reading coach to support teachers on the ground running and in supporting them with growing their knowledge and skill of teaching reading and becoming master teachers of reading. The next bucket, which you're seeing a lot of similarities here, is retention intervention. North Carolina pretty much mimics exactly Florida's approach. Their cut score is a little higher. They actually have a cut score that establishes roughly 32% don't meet that cut score on the first round, and then they provide alternative assessment and portfolio options for demonstration of sufficient reading skills for promotion. On slide 14, based on North Carolina's department, they would suggest these are the key components of implementation. They have a director and 8 regional consultants and 1 charter school consultant. They have a universal statewide assessment system. You see it's M-class, again, currently, but they're in the process of adopting new assessment, K-3. North Carolina provided a guidebook, which is basically the guidance on how to implement the policy. They provided 33 professional development trainings and activities based on effective research-based instruction, all available online. They keep all their resources on what they call a line binder, a Read to Achieve line binder, and it's resources that range for teachers to educators to community to business partners, instructional videos, etc. They have basically a hub to keep all their resources for implementation of the Read to Achieve program. And I've mentioned this already, they increased focus on summer reading camps. They're really focusing on getting kids there and also the quality of those camps, ensuring they do actually serve the purpose in intensifying intervention services, getting the kids the support they need to ensure success or ensure progress over the summer months. On page 14, the funding you'll see at the bottom. There's $1.1 million for state staff and implementation, $26 million for summer reading camps, and it looks like roughly $6 to $10 million for their assessment system that they use statewide. K-3. Slide 15 shows you their results to date. So they enacted their policy in 2012. The vertical line you see on this chart reflects their year of enactment. And you see that they were actually starting to make some progress prior to enactment, and they've continued to make progress since. So they've increased by 4 percentage points of students proficient and above, and they've decreased the percent of students scoring below basic by 5 percentage points. Moving on to Indiana. Indiana is unique, and it's not done as it's been done in the 3 states in which I've shared so far. Much of what they've done is through administrative rule. There was a law that was maybe 3 sentences in length, and it was more heavily focused on eliminating social promotion, and then it required the State Board of Education to basically put meat on the bones, if you will. Indiana is unique in many different ways, and you'll see that here. But the first one is Indiana allows districts to select the comprehensive assessment system they want to use to screen and monitor the progress of students. Again, early identification of students who have reading deficiencies. Schools are required to prioritize remediation resources towards students in grades 1 through 3 who are deficient in reading. Intervention services for any student identified with a reading deficiency must be provided, and for retained students, it increases slightly for the intervention services and supports that they are to be provided, and giving tips to parents and a home reading plan for retained kiddos. Retention is the last resort, and they also have good cause exemptions to recognize the needs of some students. And lastly, they created their own summative assessment, which is called the IREAD 3 in 3rd grade, that is administered to all 3rd grade students, and that is the assessment in which determines whether students have sufficient reading skills for promotion or those that don't and truly need an entire year of intensive intervention services to catch up. Students are given 2 chances to demonstrate sufficient reading skills for promotion, and their cut score is closer to around 10% of students that typically are retained in Indiana. They've kind of bantered back and forth between 10 and 9. You'd like to see that go down as performance is increasing, but right now they're looking around 10 or 9%, what's been occurring since 2010. I do want to share a couple of things because of the difference between Indiana and the other 3 states in which I've shared is the comprehensive assessment system. I think, honestly, you can go either way in respect to a universal statewide literacy screener or a comprehensive assessment system. But I do think there's a lot of pros in respect to a universal statewide literacy assessment system. But there's also a pro, I think, for district selected as well. So for district selected comprehensive assessment systems, it gives them flexibility, right? There are a number of valid and reliable assessments of reading that give you really good information to provide targeted instruction to meet the needs of kids. They also identify kids that are having reading difficulties. There are a number of assessments that do that and do that well, providing screening and progress monitoring. So there is a pro in giving districts autonomy to select the comprehensive assessment system they want to use, as long as it's aligned with the science of reading and it's a reliable, valid tool, and gives them good information to address students' needs. I do find there's more pros, however, in the universal statewide literacy screener, but it just depends if the state is right to make that move. The pros are there's an apples-to-apples comparison. There's a K-3 assessment that identifies students with reading deficiencies that gives you an apples-to-apples comparison. So one district isn't identifying students as a reading deficiency compared to another student identified with a reading deficiency. You also can provide statewide training that's consistent, district to district, on the use of that tool and how to use that information to inform instruction. For data reporting purposes, it gives the state an opportunity. It gives the state an opportunity to for districts to report the information, monitor the progress, and also to identify districts that might need additional support, right? And so I think those are some of the pros in regards to the universal statewide literacy screener. So if you see on slide 17, full disclosure, with Indiana, they hit the ground running with leadership at the time. They passed their policy in 2010. It was a huge priority of the state and the superintendent at the time. And there was great progress, or more progress made at the onset of this policy than there has been since. So what you see here are what's in place currently, for the most part, in Indiana to support implementation of Indiana's K-3 reading policy. And for Indiana, I do not know the funding that they started with to actually enact this policy. I'll do some more homework and follow up in respect to their funding to get this thing going. If you turn to slide 18, you'll see their results. So as you can see, this is showing percent proficient and above on the left side, and on the right side is showing percent below basic. Indiana is reflected in red. Indiana enacted a policy in 2010. The vertical line represents that enactment. And you can see the progress since the enactment of the policy. Basically increasing percent proficient by 7%, by 7 percentage points. And if you look to the right side on below basic, since the enactment of the policy, there's been a decrease in the percent of students scoring below basic, a decrease in 3 percentage points. Slide 19 is really a slide that kind of shows the results of the 8 states that have what Excel and Ed considers comprehensive K-3 reading policies. And you can see that there's difference in results, right? It's all about implementation in respect to these states. You see that I shared with about Florida, Indiana, Mississippi, and North Carolina. Those are states that have probably made the most progress since the end of the policy outside of Arizona. And so what this state reflects is the 8 states, again, that have K-3 reading programs compared to the average of non-K-3 reading program states and how they fared on NAEP 4th grade reading. The red line represents the average of the non-K-3 reading program states. And of course, the blue bars represent the progress that's been made since the enactment of the policy in states that have a comprehensive K-3 reading policy. So I was asked to share a little bit about a few other states. What I'll recommend is if you want to learn more about California and D.C., they are reflected in the state-by-state analysis document in which I provided alongside the slide deck. And then New Jersey and South Dakota were also mentioned as possibly wanting to take a deeper dive in. Those 2 states do not have any law in respect to K-3 reading policy on the books. So those states are 2 states in which I couldn't really delve deeper into. Yeah, at that time, I'd love to open it up for any questions, concerns, anything you have.
Thank you, Carrie. Really appreciate you putting this presentation together and helping us sort of get more informed. I think we have a couple of questions. So, Audrey, I saw you.
Yep, thank you. I'm curious, I feel like there's a lot of focus put on 4th grade NAEP scores. And while it's encouraging to see an increase in those scores, what we also know, what's seen in widespread studies, is that those gains, especially if they're attributed to another year or more in K-3, fade. And so I'm wondering, and even a recent research article that I read on the state of Florida shows that those gains fade by 8th grade and certainly by high school, and that in fact students who are on one side or the other of the cut score, there's really not a significant difference in high school graduation. Have you all begun to look at that data and addressed it in your policymaking in any way?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up the question. It's a great question to ask. So there's a few answers in respect to that. And first and foremost, I'm going to actually address your latter point or latter comment, and that the research actually does show there's a difference in these kids that are retained. And I'll be glad to follow up with the research summaries in which we have in respect to that. One is that retained kids compared to those that just met the cut score actually outperform those that just met the cut score through 8th grade on math and in reading. Another finding is that they actually have a higher GPA and they take less remediation courses, and they have a higher probability of graduating high school. So there's been newer research that's been conducted to follow those kids all the way through, and so I'd love to provide that information to you all in respect to retention portion. Second, middle school matters, right? I don't know if there's, I have a feeling this is a nationwide challenge. It's not just Florida, but middle school is a challenge. Middle school is an area in which we see a lot of concern in respect to performance in reading and in math. You see a plateau and a little bit up, not even just a little bit, a pretty big dip in respect to performance in math and reading in middle school. And I really do believe that's a bigger conversation. You know, we can do so much to prepare them for middle school, but middle school has to be prepared too to continuously provide instruction and support in the area of reading while they're learning new content, learning new complex skills, and continuing nurturing their reading skills to help them gain knowledge from that content, science, social studies, all your top math, every other subject area. So I think middle school's a bigger nut to crack. In respect to NAEP, it is the one tool in which we have that we can do some national, you know, we can do comparisons state to state, and that's the only reason in which we use it here. I use it in the descriptive nature, and that it's really just showing the progress that's been made since the enactment of the policy. You can't discount that there's other policies that put in place in these states that may have an impact on that data as well, right? So, for example, Florida, Indiana, and Mississippi, actually, as well as North Carolina, also enacted AS school grading. So I wouldn't suggest that when I say the improvement since the enactment is all attributed to the actual policy itself, but it does share a descriptive look of what's occurred since the enactment of that policy.
Can I just follow up very quickly? So this study that I was referring to is by Schwert, West, and Winters, and it's the effects of test-based retention on student outcomes over time, regression, discontinuity evidence from Florida. Much of the results that you are sharing are in this research article. Are you referring to an additional article that shows that graduation is more likely? Because in this one it shows 64% for students who were promoted versus 60% for students who are retained.
Yeah, so there's been a more recent study conducted in 2017 that shares the GPA remediation courses and the higher probability of graduating. It's done by Marcus Winters, which was a co-author of the 2015 results in which you're sharing. But within that 2015 results that you're sharing, I think it's important to note that they did two analyses, and I don't want to belabor this. They did two analyses. One was same grade comparison, one was same age comparison, and in the same grade comparison and versus the same age is where you see the nuance here in respect to that. So I would be glad to have further conversations in respect to that and be glad to follow up. I'd love to have a conversation about it. So, but I hope that addresses your question.
Thank you.
Carrie, if you could send that to Alicia, that would be great. And I didn't see any other questions, and we're going to move this along because we want to get to some robust conversation. So thank you again, Carrie. That was awesome information. We so appreciate you being making yourself available, and I'm sure more questions are going to be coming your way.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to move on to item number 4, and Sean Ross is going to share a little bit of an update on some work that he has been doing, and I'll be full transparency working with Read On around some AZ Merit 4-year third grade trend data analysis and some case studies. And before you dive in, Sean, I thought I'd just give a quick little, this came out of, we spend a lot of time on the system and what's not working, and we wanted to do as much data analysis and deeper dive into success, what we're calling success analytics and decoding what works and really understanding and unpacking where we see success. So the ADE and with Heather and Jonathan and Sean and they're leaning into this and being available and open to doing it. We're excited to be able to begin this work. It's only in the beginning process, but we thought it was important to update the group on this, share a little bit of information. So take it away.
Thank you, Chairperson Clark. I will be brief, I promise. I only have 10 slides. And I'm super excited, though. As Terry said, this is a project we're working on in collaboration. It's all about highlighting what's working in schools across the state. It is so wonderful to get to call a school to say, hey, this is Sean from Move On When Reading, and I'm calling because you're doing really well, and I'd like to talk to you about that, and I want to share that with everyone else. And so this has actually been the highlight of my month. So I'm super excited to talk to you. Again, it is a partnership with Read On and the Department of Ed. We're calling it Decoding What Works. If you find that cute, thanks. I came up with it. If you think it's cheesy, it's Terry's fault. No. But we thought it was a cute name. And so here's the purpose of it. We are going to identify schools in Arizona who have had the largest growth in their third grade AZ Merit ELA scores and the largest decrease in their minimally proficient scores for third grade ELA between 2015 and 2018. As a reminder, those are all the years of AZ Merit. So it's from the very start until the most recent delivery of that assessment. So Terry's wonderful research guys at Piper dove into the data and they found us the trends. They showed us the schools with the most growth, with the greatest decrease in minimal proficiency across the state, and that's kind of where we're launching from. We are reaching out to those schools, and we are going to interview educators and parents, and we're going to identify the practices that they think have most contributed to their growth. So we're sort of going to bring a lot of the data piece. They're going to give us the story, and the story is really, really, really important. And we are going to then build these case studies, these success analytics that we are going to promote on our respective websites, that we are going to share with the state, we're going to share with the board, with the governor's office. We're just going to kind of shout from the rooftops, like, hey, here are some schools around the state. Here's what they're doing that's working. And then the sort of shadow curriculum, I'll borrow from my days in the classroom. You know, you have what you teach, and then you have the things you're especially driving home. One of our goals is really to build a network of schools to support each other for greater student growth. So as an example, one of the schools that we are going to reach out to is in Santa Cruz. They are literally a border school. You can throw a rock from the school into Mexico. And one of the things I hear as the director for Move On and Reading quite frequently is I will talk to my colleagues around the state, and these are all very legitimate, so I'm not in any way diminishing this, but I'll hear the reasons why scores aren't changing or the reasons why things aren't working. And we are very purposely selecting schools that buck those trends, that sort of buck those reasons why, to give those really great examples around the state of what is working and to highlight some interesting pockets of success. I think Terry has provided you with two of our tables. You have a table one.
I haven't yet, but I have them on hand, but I realized they were in your slides, so.
Oh, okay. So we actually have a pretty detailed packet of data. This is just basically the broad scope. Again, the gentlemen from Piper were wonderful enough to run these numbers for us. We identified the district and charter schools who had the highest percent growth between 2014 and 2018. We looked at linear growth, and then we also made the decision to look at percent growth because we know growth is not always a linear process. We also took a look at the largest decreases in percent minimally proficient. And this is similar but different data. Growth in percent passing is one thing, but how are you addressing that cohort that's struggling the most? How are you helping your kiddos in the most need? So Terry and I thought that it was really important to balance that, to have schools from sort of both data sets, because they may not appear in both. They may be very different. You may have a school whose percent passing is rather low, but they've made huge progress in moving students out of the minimally proficient range, and they deserve to be celebrated as well. So here's how we picked the schools. So Terry and I, Sarah Bondi, our K-3 literacy specialist, who's actually back at the department doing a training today, we all sat down with the guys from Piper and we looked at how we would select schools. We, of course, looked at percent growth. We looked at percent reduction in minimal proficiency. We looked at locale, so we want to make sure that we have schools, and in fact, we're choosing 2 schools from city, so urban, rural, suburban, and towns. That's how data tends to be broken down at the state level. That's how it tends to be presented with education data at the state level, so we wanted to mimic that. Also to make sure we're getting a good cross-section of types of schools. We are definitely looking at counties. We're making that a major focus so that we are hitting as much of the state as possible. We're doing as much of a balance between district to charter. And then we're looking at free and reduced lunch percentages because we want to make sure that we're looking at schools that have some significant challenges and are making real success. This is an example. This is a very small example. Terry's not kidding when she describes this as a work in progress. I literally had my first conversation with the first principal of Wildflower School 2 days ago, I think. It was within like the last couple days. They're all blurring together. But we are initially reaching out to, we have 8 schools on our initial list. And those 8 schools come from 6 counties. And there's a split, I think it's 5-3 between district and charter. So we have a really good representation from across the state. The reason I'm not listing the 8 schools on this slide is because we haven't reached out to them yet, and this is public data, and I didn't want somebody to call and be like, hey, congratulations. They're like, well, what are you talking about? So I just listed the first 2, the people we have actually spoken with. So as an example, we have Sage Academy, which is a small charter school in Maricopa. It's in Queen Creek. And then we have Wildflower School, which is a school in the Avondale district. And then this is the data table. This is kind of what we looked at to make our determinations. And you'll notice percent growth. Sage Academy has had a really large percent growth from 7% to 53%. Wildflower, 33 to 60. Some of our thinking in selecting Wildflower as an example is we wanted a big district. We wanted a district school. We wanted other large districts to be able to look and go, oh, hey, that's us. Like we're that school. So if they can do it, we can do it too. But in particular, we want a school whose data initially was sort of in line with the rest of the state, right? Like 33% of their kids passing, but then went well beyond the state average. So it was really important to us to find some data sets that showed that. Then we have the reduction in minimally proficient. Sage is a city school, Wildflower suburban. They are both in Maricopa, and I just want to address that quickly. It's our goal to get you, if not a full case study, then like a really close approximation by the next meeting of this ad hoc committee, which you can imagine is a really Herculean task, especially considering all the other work that goes on. We still have 100 literacy plans in queue waiting to be reviewed. So there's quite a bit of work to be done, but we want to have these ready for you. So Terry and I just made the strategic choice of picking two of the Maricopa schools so we could get to them quickly, we could meet with them quickly. Not that we aren't going to do an excellent job, but that we could then present that material to you as well. And then we have their free and reduced lunch percentage as well. So when we go to these schools, we are setting up interviews. And what we're asking is we would like to interview the superintendent or charter holder, the principal, 1 or more K-3 teachers, depending on what the school thinks is most relevant, reading coach or reading interventionist, and then 1 or more parents, again, based on what the school thinks is relevant. And Terry and I have been really conscious, and I'm a list maker, I'm a planner, and so I'm having to get more comfortable with this, and so I'm just saying that up front. Terry and I have talked, and we've made the decision as a group to really go in without pre-scripted questions. We've made the decision to go in to say to the school, hey, tell us your story. And the story they tell us, the story of their success, the story of their growth, that's going to dictate the nature of our conversation. That's going to dictate the nature of our data dives. If they talk about increasing their SPED population, we're going to go look at that data. If they talk about increase in ELL, we're going to look at that data. So we're really going to let the schools lead the way, because many of these schools don't get a chance to tell this story. Usually they're telling maybe some other stories. And when ADE calls, it's not always super pleasant, but man, it gets to be this time, which I'm really excited about. So we're gonna meet with all those folks. We're gonna build these case studies. And we're gonna, again, identify and highlight effective K-3 practices around the state. We're gonna tell the stories of these schools. And then we're gonna try to build that network of K-3 communities so that schools, so if I'm a school in Santa Cruz, and I see the other school that's highlighted, I say, well, you know what, not only do I know that school, like I go to the same grocery store as that principal, and I know those teachers, and I'm going to reach out to them, I'm going to talk to them, because, you know, bad teachers borrow, good teachers steal, right? Like we should all be taking from each other what works. So that is the goal, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Member Wellborn.
Thank you. I'm so excited with you on this. This is going to be so much so interesting to hear what you come up with. I do have a question, though, on your two charts where you show the 3-year average third grade class size, and some of the numbers here are just rocking me off my chair.
Sorry, we should have clarified that, we've gone back and forth, and we think we're going to actually rename that something. It's actually not the classroom size. It's not the number of students in the classroom. It's the actual third grade cohort size.
Oh, it's
averaged.
The cohort. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So that is why that's whacking out. And for that exact response is what we actually spoke about that yesterday. We need to relabel that. But that helps you to define whether you're because again, the percent of growth, if it's a very small school, that size is going to be very small. And so it's interesting to see those larger schools that are still able to have a significant amount of growth. That tells you that there's some really interesting things happening there.
Okay, thank you.
And we remember Wellborn, we will have a range of both. Actually, some of our schools have smaller third grade cohorts, and some of them have very large cohorts.
Right. I also appreciate that you're not going with prescripted questions, but one of the factors that I'm very interested in is sort of the experience they've had with teacher turnover, because we've learned how serious it is in the state and how that challenges some schools more than others. So is there a way to find that out too? Thank you.
Yeah. Again, the idea behind that was that we don't want to guide their story and come in with assumptions of, we want them to literally lock on, these are the things we feel drove it. Then we can ask and sort of fill in on some sort of, just so that there's uniform, so there will be sort of demographic and some uniform profile of these case studies, but really important that they tell what they feel is driving their work. So.
And then Chairperson Clark, Member Warborn, it also connects really nicely thematically with the Read-On's Acceleration Zone project, where these schools are zeroing in on what works. They're really doing not necessarily full root cause analysis, but they're looking at the source of their success. And then in finding that source, they can scale, hopefully. They can really look at what's working and devote their energy to it, really protect it if they're considering some other changes. And so that's, again, one of the kind of side benefits of what we're looking at.
And I think we just want to open it up, Sean, to questions if anyone has any, but also to know this is a work in progress, and if there is additional thoughts or feedback, please let Sean or myself know. But I appreciate Sean's leadership in this and the ADE's leadership and being willing to work on this project. And thank you for making the time today to present. But
thank you.
Other questions, thoughts? Comments?
Of course,
Audrey.
I will. So I'm really excited about this too. Thank you very much for sharing this. I think I also agree with Member Wellborn, who is appreciative of not having that prescriptive set of questions, because I think that one of the things with the literacy plans is that, it's very focused on compliance. Do you have these things that research tells us we should have? And it crowds out the ability to tell other stories that might lead to some innovative practices that work in particular communities. So thank you for that. Looking forward to following it. And Chairwoman Clark, you mentioned that you have more, or maybe it was you, Sean, that mentioned you have more demographic data. I would be really interested to see as this moves along. You mentioned particularly SPED enrollment and ELL, percent SPED, percent ELL. I think that would help also for us to match ourselves to schools in our communities that we might be wanting to follow.
And that is data that we have collected on some of the schools we've picked and will continue to collect. And it's one of the benefits of being at the department, because I'm right next to our Office of English Language Acquisition Services. I'm right below our Exceptional Student Services Office. So yeah, that's going to be part of the data profile. Other questions? Great. All right. Well, thank you. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to let me know.
Thank you, Sean. All right, so we are moving on to item number 5, and that is presentation, discussion, and action to identify successful areas in early literacy and areas of improvement in early literacy, including move on when reading. And for me, I read that as this is our chance to have a robust conversation with all committee members on what your own thoughts are and your own experiences are. Alicia, anything else?
So Chairwoman Clark, members of the committee, I would add that this discussion and the reason for my communication to you at the October 1st meeting was that it's very important for board staff to have your thoughts down in a Word document on paper, because from these discussions, this is what we're building the draft report from. So my thought process is, depending on how the conversation goes and the paperwork, the homework I get from you all, I will be able to write a report that is detailed in specific areas within early literacy. I cannot do that. I cannot help you do that unless I have it on paper and I have your thoughts. So if you have yet to email that to me, please do so, because I want to make sure that I give this project as much time as I can before the November 7th meeting. So I do believe in your packets that Deputy Director Baden passed out. He did provide some summaries that the committee members have given me already. So if you just want to take that home and look at it and whatnot and think about it, that's fine. But really this conversation today, at least for the next hour, is just to have open discussion, open dialogue of areas of improvement or ahas or things that you would want the committee to look at.
Great, thank you. This is where we'll go. If anyone wants to jump in, I would encourage that, but we will also, even if it's just about thoughts of what you heard today, we want to hear from everyone, so I'll be going down the half circle if that's what we need to do. But is there anybody that just can't wait to share?
Me.
Okay. Karen, you're on.
Thank you, Chairperson Clark and members of the committee. Thank you for bearing with me while I'm on the phone and for a robust conversation. As Alicia kind of outlined, I wanted to weigh in on some issues that are of utmost importance, I think, to where we can go, both short-term and long-term. And I happen to be sitting with members of the Florida staff and members of the Department of Ed and the Office of Early Learning. So I've had the past 3 days been able to engage in some of the work that they've been doing, and so they've kind of contributed to my thinking on this subject. When we talk about, where we could go and we look at a variety of issues related to cut scores, and we look at also this issue of professional development. The area of which seems to be the most productive for me is the specific interventions that are happening in the K-1-2 space. And those interventions, looking at both where the resources of literacy dollars are going to instill and promote highly qualified instruction through the teachers at the K-1-2 level. A lot of the data supports that these particular individuals aren't the highly skilled, that they become more skilled as they go up into the higher grades. So looking at how we create resources for teachers in this space, how we define what interventions are being used in line with evidence-based, how these interventions are moved forward with fidelity, and how we create ongoing professional development to support the teachers in identifying specific interventions. If we look at this issue of cut scores, it really can be seen almost as an aspect of intervention, whereby we say, with the identification of more students, what percentage of these students are receiving the interventions, what interventions are they receiving, and at what frequency in the K-1-2 grades. So when they get to the third grade, it isn't a matter of retaining more, as some have said, but that we have less to retain because our interventions have been so individualized and meaningful that that population has been reduced. What assessments are we doing and using in order to identify the students? The alignment, certainly, of a KDI-like instrument would be appropriate. and looking at how that is carried forward into K-1-2 so that we have measurable data would be ideal. We talk about accountability. We talk about accountability of resources and where the literacy dollars are going. So having, the specific literacy plans addressing these particular aspects of how these interventions are being employed in a more intentional way would be ideal as well. So that's one piece, and I'm sorry for doing this, but I have to jump off, and I'm trying to get all of this stated before I have to exit. The other piece that I wanted to touch on is this issue of policy alignment. For years and years, many of our agencies and many of our organizations have done really stellar work at identifying particular issues and needs around language acquisition, early literacy for the development of our students being successful in the upper grades. What we haven't done so well at is using these documents, building on these documents, aligning these documents so that when we move forward or identify a policy to move forward, we're all talking from the same point of view. So that would be my other short-term kind of opportunity that I'd like to identify. And then, as I mentioned in the intervention conversation, really looking at the professional development that aligns and coordinates not only amongst the preschool area, but certainly the K-1, 2, 3, and how we could do that to better support the teachers in identifying these students as we move forward. So I apologize. That felt like a fire hose as I'm talking, but I need to scoot. So
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Do you need her to send some of those in bullet form, or if nothing else, to Alicia? Karen, did you hear that?
Is Alicia nodding like, Karen,
yes.
Please do this? Yeah.
Yes. She is sending you that.
Yes, Alicia,
Yeah.
I'll be happy.
Thank you.
So thank you, Alicia.
All right. Thank you. So I asked my co-chair to be ready to speak next and share some of her thoughts. So Dawn.
Thank you. Karen, I want to follow up with a couple things. I want to follow up with some of the thoughts that she shared with, because that was mirroring some of the thoughts that I was having, but I also had a few others I wanted to add to that. I think that one of the things I was proud of the work that our committee did last time was looking at the policy and trying to give guidance, giving guidance to ensure that that the support, the spirit of the legislation that was captured a little more clearly, and in looking at being proactive and giving guidance to the field about the importance of early intervention. And I think that looking at those interventions and staying true to the spirit of the law, being as proactive as possible in providing that early support and early intervention is important, from clarity of those interventions to ongoing professional development for teachers. I think that is huge, and something that I hope that we continue to refine in our conversations and our thoughts and actions. Something that Carrie said earlier in our presentation today, a policy is only as good as its implementation, sort of struck at me a little bit. And one of the thoughts I'm thinking about is, I know we had some conversation today from Don Wallace and other thoughts and opinions about lots of different things. I know from my perspective as a district leader and from my networking with other district leaders and teachers, I think that there is great concern at the idea of raising a cut score with not being completely confident without the thought of what is the instrument that we are using and what data do we get back from that instrument to inform instruction. The idea, when we looked at some of the ingredients, my other thoughts was when we were listening to these other states that have seen great outcomes, I look at that we have a lot of the key ingredients. I mean, we have a lot of the same outcomes and expectations. We don't always follow the same recipe. Looking at support or funding or early childhood or a variety of assessments and tools, from diagnostics and screeners to tests and assessments. So I think one of the things that would be important for us to talk about is ensuring, as part of that spirit, what are the tools and resources that our teachers in our state has at their disposal to use to inform their instruction, and make these meaningful tools. Because again, this is truly not a third grade issue. This is a pre-K on. This is systemic, and that support is essential. And the tools we use is huge in guiding the professional development, in guiding that in that intervention. So those are my rambling thoughts as I'm thinking through all these parts and pieces. But I just truly feel that the spirit of the legislation, the support, the professional development are huge, but the data piece is essential. And a quality tool that tells us what we need to know to inform all of those pieces is going to be essential all the way. Those are my thinkings.
Excellent, thank you. And you're going to put those into some bullet forms for Alicia?
Yes, I will.
Or did you already?
Chairwoman Clark, co-chair or vice chair Foley. Dr. Foley.
Yes.
When you're talking about the tools and the resources that those K-3 teachers have in the third grade with the interventions, and you're talking about what they currently have, but I would challenge you also to have those conversations with your constituent groups to ask, in the perfect world, what would you want or what do you need? Because if we don't get a whole picture, then we're just going to get the status quo, right? Mm-hmm. So let's be a little bit brave and get the whole picture.
Despite who's paying the price tag, what would be the
well,
ideal?
And that was what I said at the last meeting. I said, take funding out of it and just think whole picture and see what we can do, right?
Yeah.
Don't limit yourself by having a narrow, just make it really wide. So,
thank you.
Awesome. All right, thank you. Anyone else want to go next? Oh, thank you, Dana.
So I want to second what you mentioned about the resources that we currently have and the discussions I had with my colleagues. I approached our K-3 reading interventionists, our K-3 principals, and then just colleagues that I knew would feel comfortable providing me their feedback. And what they said was very much what we saw from Florida, what we saw from North Carolina, and from Mississippi, in that they feel that while we know as practitioners that retention is meant to be an intervention, that right now it feels more punitive to a practitioner, to a family, and to the student, because it isn't, while the spirit and the intent was that, the implementation has been such that K1, we have dibbles, we have the screeners, but that's not where the emphasis goes. So we have kiddos that we know. I'm a first grade teacher. I have 3 I could tell you right now that I'm worried about, knowing that in third grade they're going to be being discussed. We know that this is coming for them and they are receiving support, but then it means they're pulled out of our classroom. They can't come after school because they need a bus to take them home and there's no funding for the bus to take them home. So there's all these little logistical issues that come with addressing kinder, first and second grade supports that are very, very much needed. I starred and circled and highlighted, I believe it was North Carolina, that had summer camps for 1 and 2, because those sort of things are the things that, if that funding's behind it, that those parents can participate in if they have a way to get their kids to and from those interventions. And so in a perfect world, that's what my colleagues mentioned. Reading coaches that aren't pulled out of the classroom to coach, but full-time reading positions that are trained, that are able to go in and show teachers beyond the theoretical. I think it's fabulous that our higher ed is focusing more on the science behind reading, because it's so needed. But when you take it from theory and then you're staring a kid in the face and you're trying to diagnose what they're showing you, it's so difficult. So having those permanent people in place, I think, would be a fantastic solution to look at. K2, K3. I also think talking about increasing a cut score, it's very reminiscent, I feel, of when we started to talk about having an aligned assessment. When we first moved to AZ Merit, well, we need something that's going to show truly what our kids are doing. However, I feel it's a little premature until we know what our assessments are going to be. When we know what that looks like, I think we can talk about okay, how can we truly show students, parents, and teachers where they are at third grade moving into fourth grade. But discussion of it before then, I think, will again feel punitive to LEAs and to teachers and their families.
Chairwoman Clark, if I may challenge Member Burke a little bit. So one of the things that the State Board talked about at the retreat is this idea of, yes, we don't know what the menu of assessments will look like for 3-8, but we're also one legislative session prior to the school year in which menu is implemented for grades 3-8. So we as the collective, we have an opportunity to provide ideas to the legislator on what they could look at or thoughts to consider, such as some of these states that just have one reading assessment in third grade, then that take the reading assessment multiple times in order to show proficiency. That could be something that comes out of this committee, just like the option of whatever the board selects as a vendor for the menu. An option could be setting cut scores on each one of those menu options. I mean, so here there's two ideas, right? So this committee, you can come up with those type of ideas, and ultimately those ideas will go to the state board, and the state board has the ultimate authority on that. But you can start thinking about it now. Just think about it more abstractly and more creatively. And again, just an opportunity to say, hey, let's look at this. You know?
I think that's a good challenge for this group. I think when I heard increased cut score, I heard that it was going to be a mandate regardless of what was decided. But I think taking this opportunity for us to look at what those other states were doing and providing several recommendations, I think is a great opportunity. Thank you for clarifying.
Chairwoman Clark, Member Burke. So when you talk about raising the cut score right now, you're raising the cut score on AZ merit. Right. So if AZ merit is no longer the statewide assessment, then the state board will have to set cut scores in any area. Right. And so, or on any assessment.
I also just want to speak to that. What I know in the conversations that we've been involved in, and yes, I think there at times was a sort of mandate around it, but what I think many of the partners have moved to is develop a plan to, and this group here can really influence what would be involved in any exploration and developing of a plan to look at a phased-in approach of raising cut scores, taking into account that we have the menu of assessments opportunity or challenge as well. And so I appreciate Alicia helping us to kind of get out of our own heads a little bit and think about that. But that helped me to kind of go, oh, that's an opportunity to then say, this is what we need to know to understand to be even able to make a recommendation. Yeah. So is that helpful, or is that... Okay, Barry, thank you.
So just Chairwoman Clark, members of the committee, just as like a staff level position, we go to these national conferences all the time, and one of the states who significantly raised cut scores in the past couple years did so with a lot of public pushback because they didn't really follow a natural process, and they raised it substantially very quickly. So one of the things like that we need to do, and I actually circled it in one of these things, was I highlighted the state and I said I need to go back and I need to follow and see what they did when they reestablished their cut scores, because in Arizona we don't necessarily want to do that because they didn't have a great time, so we want to have a good time. So it's a good conversation.
Great. Yes, Audrey.
So am I understanding correctly that we will increase the cut score, just it's a question of whether we're phasing it, how quickly or not, or is that still not a foregone conclusion?
Hearing officer, Chairwoman Clark, member ref, did I say that right? Okay. The cut score is associated with an AZ merit assessment, and so when you look at a new assessment, you're going to have to set a cut score.
No, but I'm referring more broadly to it. It seems like what I'm hearing this morning is that there is a policy goal to increase on whatever however we are going to scale or equate assessments, so that instead of looking at 3% on whatever assessment, we would be looking at 20%, because there's a concern that we're communicating a message to parents and to the community that if you pass that cut score, you're proficient in reading, and we're concerned about that. So what I'm asking is, broadly, is it already predetermined that at some point Arizona will have a 20% cut score instead of 3%?
I'm going to let Member Welborn, because but do you want to respond to that first and then? Okay. Member Welborn?
So if I can speak as the member from the board, there is no such policy right now to raise the scores. There is strong interest in figuring out how to improve proficiency rates. Mm-hmm. So I think our job as a committee is to make recommendations to the board that says, here's what we think will move the needle. And if we, as a group, we think changing the cut scores is part of it, then we can do that. But I think we need to look broader than just retention rates. Yeah. Alicia brings up an important challenge that we are faced with, is going to this system of menu of assessments. And it's a huge challenge for us in terms of if you have your schools using 10 different benchmark assessments, how are we going to set up any kind of leveling of performance? So one thing I think we need to think about is this an opportunity for us to go another path with just the reading portion? Would we suggest that the only way to effective a statewide initiative around improving reading proficiency is you got to have a single data source? That's an option for us. Or we could do a different option that says we can live with 10 different benchmark assessments and we can figure out the cut scores for every single one. I think it would be really valuable to have an opinion as a group on that issue for the state board, because the state doesn't. The members of the Board of Education are really looking for some expert opinion on that. I'll also say that I haven't done a wide cross study, but my impression from the legislators is they do not understand the challenge of having menu of assessments in terms of trying to set policy and benchmarks and all those things. So that's another opportunity for us to make a statement that says we can live with menu of assessments in eight different versions of doing this, or we strongly recommend a universal screening tool, blah, 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 blah.
Can I respond to that? So I totally get that idea of a statewide assessment, but I am very hesitant for this group of us to say as a state that we know which assessment, which PD, which reading coaching model is going to be effective across all of the diverse communities in our state. And I think when we move to policy like that, it satisfies like a policy level. It's easier for us to look at the impact of our policy. But it once again removes local control, community control, parent and family voices that are so important. And we know that the people who, or the families and the students who are most impacted by these policies are typically not represented at this policy table. And so it's, I just feel very uncomfortable about giving up more local control. I would rather see us go in the opposite direction, where we are getting more parent and teacher and family and community voices engaged in what's best for their children and for their children's education. I'm just put that out.
I'm going to just keep, thank you and for sharing those thoughts. And again, I would just encourage you to respond as much in what you would like to see and how you would recommend doing that, if that's an important piece, because we could spend a lot of time, deconstructing what others might feel is equally a strong path, and we want to just right now get sort of all ideas on the table, and all concerns on the table. So I don't want to, but I want to. Nothing has been decided, and this group has a lot of opportunity to make recommendations, but those recommendations have to be as a group. Let Dr. Cruz go.
I just can I elaborate on that a little bit? So one opportunity for this group is to make a statement that says, with the existing program the way it is, there is hope that we can improve our reading proficiency, or there's not. Meaning we're seeing that looking at all these other states and all the money and other things they do that helped move the needle. So I think, again, we have an opportunity to say, if we want to achieve the ambitious goals that are in the governor's plans, what are the elements that we think are absolutely critical to make that happen?
And I'll just add on to that. And it's not asking this group to say, and this is the tool, or this is the that, or this is the that. It's just guidance on, you might need to explore that further, and this is a process by which, these are the concerns and these are the challenges, and we'd like more, So, again, it's hard not to just jump to, well, gosh, what would that tool or assessment be? But we're really trying to stay a little higher than that to say, is that something that we think doesn't jeopardize local control, but could actually move us or things. So just to that, I'm going to let you go.
Okay. It scares people when you start saying we need to increase cut scores. We're going to increase. Are we going to increase? Is that like a foregone conclusion? And, I realize we're here to help make policy recommendations, but I will tell you that in every single one of my recommendations, I see faces of kids. Mm-hmm. So regardless of how many kids were retained or how many kids are proficient, and whatever policies come out of what we do, it's important to remember that every single score has a face associated with it. And what are we going to do to ensure that we are putting the pieces in place, building a system to ensure that every single one of those faces has success? And we know the first step of that success is reading, and that's why we're here. So just a word just about accountability and raising cut scores. I'll be a little bold and say that I do think we should raise our cut scores. I think it's way too low. Now, I will have a bunch of qualifiers that go along with that. Accountability is a very scary thing for people. However, when you put accountability in with the right supports and resources, it actually makes your system more efficacious. When people begin to experience success, that breeds more success. And, there's a lot of people out there who probably are lacking the expertise, the supports, and all of those things that are necessary to be able to teach kids to read. And if we were to help infuse the system with those, that actually could be a very positive thing for Arizona. With that being said, here are some of my recommendations. I do believe we should have a comprehensive literacy K-3 assessment system. When we look at all of these things that I'm going to say, it's about building a system that helps breed success with kids. And know that I am a huge fan of local control. I have worked in LEAs for this is my 27th year, and many of those years have been spent building systems to ensure success of every single student in that system. So without that comprehensive assessment system, we're still kind of shooting arrows every which way. I also think we should design a statewide campaign around reading. Everybody should be talking about that. Expect More has done a lot of great things with the progress meter, but where's our slogan? Do we have an Arizona Reads? I know we have Avondale Reads now. We have Read on Arizona. What is our catchy phrase that when everybody's out and about or when the governor is speaking, he can use that to attract businesses here. We can talk about that in our local communities. And then we can go to all of the strategies that are underneath that to ensure that every student in Arizona is going to read and is a reader. We should look at robust PD for teachers, leaders, and parents, all around, designed around the system of teaching kids to read. We should look at a universal design for supports and resources for all the constituents in the system. All the teachers that are teaching reading, all the leaders that are leading reading should have those supports and resources at their fingertips. Around the area of reporting, I think that every school should report every year. I know we're trying to erase burden, but unless you have data to look at, it's kind of like being in your local LEA and saying, well, you're in A school, we don't have to take our benchmarks anymore. That would never happen in an LEA. You have to be able to track your progress along the way. Unless you have that data, you cannot do that. So, and that being said, I think we need to have a reporting structure at K1 and 2, because you have to see where you are in trajectory to your goal. Right. You can't just, take an assessment at third grade and go, oh, well, didn't do it again. You have to intervene early and often. And right now, we're kind of leaving that building of that system to the local LEA. While some do it very well, some are not doing it very well, and some could use some help and support. So that's my thing on the system. If I were to look at pie in the sky, it would be fantastic to have reading coaches for the schools that need it. That would be an amazing support. I think that's all for my rant right now.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. Great. Deborah, please.
All right. So I spoke to a lot of people at my school site as well as at the district site, and they gave me a lot of information that I tried to put together. The first and main point was the cut scores, and I think that's on everybody's list right now. I'm in a big district, and we have very, very few kids that end up getting retained. And for the size of our district, you would think we would have more. So it's a lot of the teachers are not concerned with the move on when reading, frankly. They're like, it's because our cut score is so low. So I agree. I think our cut score needs to be at some point raised a little bit. There was different ideas on how to do that. One idea that people are throwing out at me is, why are we determining a cut score with everybody's scores in there? Why can't we take out the ELL and our SPED kids prior to determining that cut score? Because that's changing what our cut score is. If we take them out prior to that, then our cut score automatically changes. And we determine the bottom 5% or whatever based on that. It was an idea. So that was a lot of the topic. Of course, retention, most of the teachers are very sad. They would prefer not to have retention come third grade, but it's obviously something that's important to do to help our students. So I do have a teacher on campus that used to teach in North Carolina. So she's like, here's how we did it. And it worked great. And she was a third grade teacher there. The response I was getting is pulling in some more of the ideas to have like the portfolios, like what I was explaining, just like a data portfolio at the third grade level, something that can be come back to look at in case a child does not pass, or the ability to have some intensive intervention during the summer and then maybe retake an alternative assessment. Maybe a couple times if they don't pass, have a point during the year that is, if they don't pass this alternative assessment, they stay third grade. If not, if they do pass it prior to this date, let's promote them and let them go. I do, as I talk, I look at little faces of kids that I know that I've seen the faces of kids that have been retained, and they've gone from loving school to not liking school. So any way we can go to helping the students and get them to where they need to be is on my list. We did talk about, we have a lot of preschool classes at my school, and getting more professional development with the preschool classes, getting them something that they can, some research-based phonics program that the preschoolers teachers can start using with their kids to start getting them where they need to be, as well as bringing in the assessments at an earlier age. Instead of right now we do Dibbles, which is a screener. It gives us a good idea. It helps us to dig deeper into the student and what their needs are and how to reach them. But maybe more of an assessment that can give us even more of an idea, because Dibbles is totally different than AZ Merit. We can determine whether they're going to be reading or not, but can they answer those comprehension questions? Can they answer all those types of questions that are in AZ Merit? They're two totally different things. So the Dibbles just give us an idea and help them to become readers. So if we could come up with something at the K1-2 level that helps us to know, because they can start comprehending at K1-2, they're understanding, they're readers, they're becoming so to help us get a better grasp on will they pass that state assessment once they get to third grade. Dibbles really doesn't tell us if they're going to pass that. It tells us whether they can read the questions. For a different purpose. There is some comprehension piece to Dibbles, but not like an AZ Merit comprehension. Increased staffing, paras, that's if we could get the funding. That's always the yes. Can we get that? Coaches, more coaches, whether it be at the state level or the district level, is something that people brought up. So I think that was the big thing there. Of course, the other the big one was the funding, which I don't know if we really want to go into that today, but it seems like there's so many more questions today on other things. But the funding and how is it equitable, how it's distributed right now.
Thank you, Deborah. Mm-hmm. Would you like to go next, Dave? Member Canto?
Of course. Just echoing, I hardly know where to begin, but echoing a lot of the things that I've already heard. I don't think we're personally opposed to raising the stakes with regards to the cut score. I would concur with some of the comments made that we know that those are perhaps not where they need to be, and that it does create some miscommunications. And when you're communicating with parents, that is a struggle. Well, they didn't pass the test, but here's the great news. The cut score is so low, I can promote you anyway. That creates a lot of problems in communications with parents, and perhaps it's not the most ingenuous way to be communicating where their child is or where I want them to be when we're talking about college and career readiness as a long-term goal. So certainly some of those things need to be worked out. However, that being said, then I think we really need, and I would hope that one of the charges would be for the committee and then later with the state board, is let's look at what K2 supports are we going to provide. So if I'm going to raise the stakes here, then gosh, I really hope that we're going to be significantly increasing the K2 supports that go along with that, so that the goal is still low retention, because I've done such a great job and have a robust policy and plan in place, K2, to make that achievable. And I think there's certainly an opportunity to do that, but we need to spend a lot of time, in my estimation, working on that K2 piece. And part of that would be what others have said. I continue to have a lot of concerns related to the assessment system. I don't know that I am as excited about the choice. I think I think there's some problems. There's some data things that we need to do, and so I'm also interested in determining what kind of timeline do we have for this cut score discussion, given such a tremendously changing landscape. We just lack stability there, and that's a challenge when we talk about any kind of data collection, because anything I do as an autopsy for the last few years holds no meaning for moving forward with that landscape changing. Yep. And that's something that I think is not only really frustrating for our teachers and our principals, but it's incredibly frustrating for our board and our community. So, and I would imagine that goes statewide. So I think that is a luxury. And we don't have that luxury. And so getting something in place where that would be part of those K2 supports, it's a little late in third grade to say, here, I've retained you, and what am I going to do for you? That should not be my goal. My goal should be, what can I do to prevent that from happening? And so getting money to do those things earlier on would be, I think, what, the folks I've talked to in our county, that's certainly a desire that we have. And then just some consistent professional statewide development. Back 12 years ago when I was doing those 30, 40-page reading first reports, we had more things rolled out that were consistent, and we lack that now. And so this idea of the local control is great, but it's led to so much differentiation that there's very little stuff we have in common anymore to provide, and that's frustrating. I see we were listed on a town as that one, but we're a very rural border community, and I'm an office of one with a secretary I share. For that burden to be on me to provide what I need to for our students and our staff, we need help, and so that consistency and that PD is a necessary thing. And I think those would be a bulk of the concerns that I'd like to echo from our part and our constituents.
Excellent. We appreciate those. Very thoughtful. Yeah. Did you have anything? No. Okay. I am just making note that we have about 25 more minutes, so I'm going to call on folks to add their 2 cents. Member Welborn, you've responded to some things, but I don't think you've shared your overall thoughts.
Yeah. Where do you start? And one of the ideas that I want to challenge us around is that we're just focusing on K-3, but that's just a piece of the puzzle. And that I would love to see us recognize the importance of, birth to 4 years of age and what we'd like to see happen there, even if we can't influence anything, even if we say, if we just have a policy statement that these are the building blocks that will lead you to success. We need this, we need this, we need this, and how does Arizona compare? Mm-hmm. Where are we on these things? I don't really know. I can't speak to that. I think I hear very disjointed things. Do we have a statewide policy on reading readiness? I mean, is there a place where it says this is what you need to happen beginning from birth on up? I don't know. Okay, we do. It's a question.
I think if there's a question, then maybe we don't.
No, but I'm not an expert, so maybe I'm missing it. But my point is, and then the other point is after third grade. So, how do we enforce performance and growth after third grade? Whatever cut score we decide to use, there's still going to be a marginal group of students that need additional intervention and resources. So I would like us to continue to address that piece of it. If you could have some kind of self-help bank that says, put in your keywords of what challenges you have so that teachers and instructors can have more resources there. I would love to see resources available for some kind of traveling. I don't know whether you'd call them coaches in particular, but 2 things. One would be coaches which would specifically work with teachers to help their teaching skills, but also work with the principal on the system. So I believe that in the current literacy plans, we're asking for all the elements that schools need to have. I question on how effective schools are being in implementing each component of that in a 100% compliance mode given all the other challenges they're fighting. This question of fidelity of implementation is so important. So I would like to see a SWAT team, if you will, that once we identify schools that are struggling, that we actually do something where we go out and prescribe something and not just show up and say, well, what can I do to help? But, this is what we know, given your school, your demographics, your rural, your whatever, this is what we've seen that works. And let me help you implement a system to make that work. Coaches. I do want to see a way to start getting more funding more targeted to the need. It doesn't necessarily, I ask that question, everybody thinks I'm taking money away from everybody, and I don't mean to say that I want to take any money away. I just think we need more money for the schools that have a higher challenge with this than schools that have a less of a challenge in it. I think that's it.
Great. Thank you. Carmen, are you still on the line? I want to give you a chance. You've been very patient, and thought maybe you might have some thoughts or feedback for the group.
Hi, thank you. I have everyone's comments, and I do have several points that I am in agreement with. Is the idea of truly is determined by what we choose an assessment, and so I find that difficult to have that conversation about deciding that at this point. I also think that the structures at K2 need to be strengthened so that the deciding factor isn't on third grade alone. And so the data systems that support K2 in predicting what will happen in third grade are critical. And so the differences in our assessment system prove difficult because then districts are on their own to set up their professional development pieces for that. And in addition, I think the ability to provide continued systematic professional development, such as the TRE course, is essential as we have continued turnover in our district. And so the teacher shortage that we have in Arizona is impacting what is happening in K3 because we cannot gain traction in our professional development. We're continuing to have new teachers at K3. But having that data is important for us to understand that this takes of new teachers at K3.
Lots of nodding.
And we'll send those bullet points.
Oh, perfect. You'll send those in bullet points. Carmen, there was a lot of nodding as you were talking, a lot of shaking heads, yes, and agreement. So we really appreciate you sharing those thoughts. And please, yes, get those in written form to Alicia, and she'll be eternally grateful. I am going to check with Cayenne if you...
Sure. I'll always talk. Okay, so many of the things I'm hearing are things that I certainly agree with. Some other things that I'd like to talk about is the teacher retention. You know, we have such a huge turnover, shortage of teachers, the quality of our teachers, and the training that we have provided to teachers. There's no one there to say, okay, you went to this training, now what happens next? And then also, when I think about training, when I look at, say, for example, we're using Dibbles, teachers don't understand how to use their data. They don't understand how to look at, so you could be using anything, and if you don't understand what you're looking at and how that you can change your instruction to meet the needs of your students based on that data, I don't see teachers looking enough at their data and understanding it and understanding what to do next. And then a big gap that I see, and I know when we're looking at cut scores, we say, okay, our SPED kids, they're going to get a pass. Well, then they always get a pass. And so our SPED teachers, when I look at them, they don't have the training to teach reading, and they're the ones that are supposed to be, they're working with our most needy kids who don't know how to read, and they have no training on how to teach reading. And so I see huge gaps, and now I'm in a district where I am working in special ed more, and I see a huge need there. And I suspect that all of you that work in SPED see that as well. And then going back to like those pre-service programs, when I see new teachers coming in, I also see gaps there that they don't have a good foundation in reading and how to teach reading. And so maybe working with our universities and making sure that they're coming in with a good, solid knowledge base, even though we know we're going to work with them and we're going to hire all these coaches to help them, but they need to come with some knowledge base. And lastly, I'd like to say, because I know our time is short, when we look at other states and we see the resources that they have, I think Sean and Jonathan over there would say that they might need some more resources because you have, 4 people working in your department? 2 people working
1.5
in your department? And then I see, we have all these coaches at other states. And, I think back to when I first moved to Arizona in 2004, and we were doing Reading First, and I was a reading coach, and all the fabulous training we had and the things we could implement because we were getting a lot of that. And I know we don't have the money, but we need to think about, I think somebody said, Heather, pie in the sky, maybe. What could we do if we had more resources and training in those opportunities and providing more support to our Move On Run Reading department, because they are a small but mighty group,
yes.
But they need more.
Yes, they do.
Excellent. Thank you. Audrey, you asked some questions, but I have a note that you have not shared your feedback yet. So am I correct? Would you please?
I'll always have something more to say. Thank you. And I might be the lone voice here, but that's okay, because you always have to hear the outliers thinking, right? So that would be me. I just feel like it's really, I can't express enough how critical I think it is that we really define the problem and that we define the goal. If the goal is an increase in 4th grade NAEP scores, then I suggest that we relook at that goal, because we know from the research that those scores fade. And so if the goal, and maybe I'm not clear on this, if the goal all stems from research that shows the relationship between 3rd grade reading and high school graduation, we now have research that shows that there isn't an impact. So we're spending a lot of time looking at who increased 4th grade reading scores, but we're not thinking about, does that growth sustain over time? Does it lead to high school graduation and college and career readiness? And I don't think we have that evidence. And so that's why I'm so concerned that we're raising a cut score, which ultimately will retain more children. We never talk to parents as a state about the consequences of retention, because there are decades of research that show negative and very disturbing consequences of retention. So as we think about these policy prescriptions that are going to be visited on economically disadvantaged students, largely in rural areas, some urban areas as well, ethnic minorities, these students, we're prescribing a policy prescription to them that we don't have evidence for. We don't know their communities. We absolutely think about the faces of children, but those families and parents and teachers in the schools and the communities know those faces. We talk about a KDI because we want to consider a whole child, but then in the end we don't have that information to make promotion and retention decisions with. We look at a cut score and a standardized test, and we do it between 3rd and 4th grade because we have overused the slogan, learn to read and then read to learn. In fact, I kept learning to read as a doctoral student. We never stopped learning to read, and we always learn something from reading. So we need to be really careful about how we talk about learning to read, what it means to be a reader. We need to be careful about how we talk about social promotion, and we need to make sure that parents, if I take my child to the pediatrician and they're going to prescribe a procedure or medication, I want to know what the side effects are of that. And I feel like we have not communicated that out. We've got letters that have to go to parents, never says, hey, you know what, your child is up against retention by state law, and you have no voice in that. And your teachers have no voice, and your school and your community, nobody has a voice except a cut score on a test, which is nice and objective, and we feel good because someone else made it. A test made that decision. But we don't know what we are doing to a child as a result of that promotion or retention consequence. So I am very reluctant to go along with any increase in retention until we know that that is something that's going to be effective for children. And everything that I have read, mountains of research, show that we don't know that.
Great. Can I ask you to set aside the retention policy and the retention factor and just think about the early literacy system and the 56% of students that are minimally proficient or partially proficient and are not proficient? What would you like to see to help in that
I think we need to look at, first of all, I think we need to engage those communities. I think it is very difficult for us to know what are the issues in this school, in this corner of the state, in that community. And I think that we talk about the science of reading, and we look at the National Reading Panel report, and we talk about the pillars of reading, but we don't really have evidence of how that works. And we're talking about fidelity to state policy. Well, we don't have research to show. We've had these policies in place since 2001, since the National Reading Panel, and that's not what my understanding of what we're trying to do.
Thank you. You pivoted back to the policy, by the way, and duly noted.
Chairwoman Clark, I will speak privately with member.
But we appreciate that your feedback and thoughts, and I'm always interested because I think all of us would echo the importance of understanding the communities by which we're asking for them to get more students to that proficiency level. I know that's something that Redon's done, and a number of, I think all of the members here and schools that are out there in the field try to do that, and so there's never enough of that, and so I appreciate you raising that up. All right, so Dawn, I would love for you to go next, and then Aaron, and then I think we've gotten everyone.
So thank you. I would like to echo a lot of what I've heard already today. I do believe that, Member Cox, that you took my dream. However, it would not be within myself to say that I would include that when we look at that comprehensive system, that we include pre-K into the system. There has to be that communication. It has to be each and every child, not just the children that are in kindergarten through third grade on the campus or kindergarten through eighth. It has to be each and every child on that campus. And there's a huge point to be said that when families feel comfortable and welcomed onto the campus, how they'll continue to work with the schools. And I was very impressed in reading some of the different strategies that have happened. And one of the pieces I want to come back to is the Florida model, specifically when it talked around business and community partners as being one of the key components. As one that facilitates a read-on community, I can tell you one of the biggest challenges is there are 3 school districts participating within this community that I am serving with and facilitating, and all 3 districts have a wonderful representation at the table. However, the challenge comes truly is they all do different things. And so if we want to involve the business and the community members and they can't understand the difference between the 2 of them, that becomes a little bit more challenging as well. So if we did have at least some way to have some commonality, it would be easier to be able to elevate the business and the community to help us try to move some of these measures forward. The other thing that I would add is that I would really hope that as we develop this comprehensive system and really look to what it means, that we define out what some of these things are. Because it was very clear when we talked about Florida and Indiana and all of these, that we talked about, oh, they have summer camps. Well, what is that summer camp? Is it 1 week? Is it 1 hour a day? Is it 2 hours a day, 4 days a week? I think that there's going to find that there are some differences depending on what that service actually delivered. Dosage is key. And the other thing is how are we working with our families? Is it that letter that goes home that says your child's failing and, here's the decision made? Or is it having that conversation, working with that family, involving and engaging that family into doing some systems change as well? I think that there's a big difference to what those things are. We're really easy to check the box, but yet what was it? And if we're just checking boxes, we're really not going to make movement happen no matter what. So I think that we've got to really consider when we start to make these decisions and recommendations forward to what is our minimum requirements to some of these things. Is it just the box and then that's what we all agree upon, then that's what it is. But if we say you're going to engage families and it means you're going to meet 1-to-1 with families a minimum of 5 times per year, then let's do that. Let's kind of leverage to what we have. Because there's one thing I can share, in all my years in education, never did a family come up and say, I hope my child fails. Yeah. So the idea is remembering to listen to those families and bringing them along with us and define what our minimum is. It's not just checking a box. So those are some of the things that I would add on to a lot of the visions and dreams that have already occurred. And I know for sake of time, we've got others to go. But I'll put my bullets up as well and send them because a lot of them do mirror. But I think the key is really defining to what it is and not just a list.
Great. Thank you. Erin, you're up.
Thanks, Terry. So my take is that while I hear a lot of diverse perspectives on the panel, which I think we all appreciate, I sense this shared sense of agreement among all of us that our intention is the same. And our intention is that we want all kids to be successful and be proficient in reading by the end of third grade. And I think how we frame the conversation, both as we talk about it and as we go externally to talk about it, is going to be really important, because if it becomes driven about cut score, I think that could ultimately discourage some of the value of what I think our committee is going to provide. To me, that's hopeful, both in terms of, being instructive to us as a committee as we go forward, but also in thinking about how much shared agreement we all have. In terms of specific priorities, I would echo a lot of things that have been said here, with a focus on strong intervention, both for K-3 and for students who are moving beyond third grade, because right now there's still so many kids who are being left behind that still move forward, I should say. They're still going forward, but they're still not proficient. So we have to think about those kiddos. So I would echo those comments. So to pull out a couple of things that haven't been mentioned yet, we haven't talked about pre-service and teacher training. So I would add that to the list, in addition to a strong system of professional development, both statewide, regionally, and also with reading coaches that can be placed strategically. I think all of those are awesome ideas. I would echo the comments about state staff. I heard from all these states from the presentation earlier was that they have a strong state presence who's able to add capacity and support that. So that's critical. 1.5 FTE is it's not enough. We need more. We need more help. The other thing I would add that has been mentioned before from a pre-K perspective is a really intentional connection to our early ed system. I sit on a First Things First local council in Northwest Maricopa, and what we currently have and where it is that we want to go. And so how can we leverage our collective networks to be able to do that? How can we make sure that folks know about resources available, and that here's the plan, and here's where we're going, and here's what everyone can do to play a role, I think could be really helpful.
Great, thank you. I had submitted, so you guys have a copy of my very cursory, I did these late at night, but thoughts, so I don't want to have to, I won't spend time going through them, but a lot of them were things that other members have raised up and reiterated. I think I just want to make sure that any of those thoughts or suggestions were done with two things in mind, which was to ensure our system is effective at identifying and delivering appropriate responsive interventions as early as possible, and really looking at how do we move the emphasis off the retention piece and the third grade punitive hammer drop, and how do we move it towards whenever those kids come into the K-3 system, wherever they're at, that a response and a program and a series of interventions are available to them to allow them to get to the goal of proficiency. And I think there's a lot of ways to do that. I don't think there's one magic answer. And so I thought about that and I think there are key levers in our system that we need to address. I think there's a myth out there that a lot of our kids are just on the bubble. And if we just do a little bit more, then we'll get them to proficiency, when as many kids are minimally proficient as pass. And so that 44% minimally proficient means our system is in need of, we need to do something differently to expect different results, especially for those kids. So any of the suggestions, thoughts, and exploration that I put down on paper was driven by really stepping back and looking at that and what can we learn. I think we got a great sort of top of the mountain from different states of policies and things what they're doing, but I think we can learn a lot by really talking to the people on the ground that are we need time to really look at, explore, and understand, to everyone's point today about we want to be thoughtful and intentional, and we can't do everything. We understand that. But we have to, at some point, with all the expertise we have available at this group and in all the agencies involved, be able to say, these are the things that if we did these really well, we will see of better outcomes for our kids. So that so take that as nothing in grain and stone, just some thoughts that I had around PD, accountability, guidance, funding, and some even just low-hanging fruit of some refinements still to the Move On When Reading policy as it exists today. So with that, I think we have one more item on the agenda, which is future meeting dates. We have November 7th on the books. Is there any instructions, things that you need from folks before that? And what else do we need to do
Chairwoman
to make
Clark,
you happy?
members of the committee, if you can look at your calendars for like 2019, and if you can provide a day of the week that typically works well for you, hopefully not Wednesdays. Wednesdays are difficult for board staff, but Fridays are always good. Thursdays are good. Tuesdays are not good. So Monday, Thursdays, or Fridays are typically good, and not the board meeting Mondays. Anywho, just send me some dates and times that work for you, and I will find a date and time that works for everyone. It looks as if the State Board of Education meeting for December will most likely get moved from December 3rd until December 17th, which would actually provide this committee a little more time if we feel as if we need to meet again after that November 7th meeting.
It might be nice to get one on the books.
You want to get it on the books right now?
I think so. If you don't mind.
Sure. Throw out a date, and I will tell you if the boardroom or if board staff is available.
Of November?
November 28th.
She said Wednesdays are not good. See, I listen.
That Wednesday would be fine.
Oh, that Wednesday's okay. So yay. So the 28th is a possibility. Do I see any? Oh, that really doesn't work.
That doesn't work.
The afternoon.
I can't do the 28th.
Could you call in?
If I have to call in, I can do that. Okay.
And in afternoon, not
In the
morning?
afternoon, I could possibly make things happen.
Me too.
Anything after like 2 o'clock.
Would that work for most over on this side? I'm sorry, I was looking on that side. Okay, I've seen. So Wednesday afternoon, after 2, you said?
2 works.
Not afternoon. How many on the morning could make it work? All right, I can make it work either way. How many could not make the morning work? It was you and you.
Right.
And you.
Afternoon would be a little better if I'm calling in.
Okay. All right. Let's find one backup, maybe, but Wednesday afternoon is, I looked by count of hands, better than morning or not? Did I get that wrong?
Afternoon is better for me.
Raise your hand if you can do the 28th afternoon in the time slot of 12 to 3. Raise your hand if you can do the time slot 9 to 12. Okay, so afternoon. Afternoon.
What about Thursday the 29th?
I could do that day.
I could do that day.
Yep.
I could do that.
Morning or afternoon?
Afternoon.
Morning.
Either. I can do either.
Afternoon.
If you could do afternoon from 12 to 3, raise your hand.
Carmen, are you on the phone? Are you weighing in?
Well, that's a good hand.
That's a good time. I'm holding it.
We think you said yes, you'd try to make it work.
Thursday morning, 9 to noon.
You mean Thursday morning, 9 to noon, or no, Wednesday?
Thursday.
This is the Thursday 9 to noon option. So it looks like the afternoon of Wednesday from 12 to 3, the 28th, and the afternoon of the 29th, 12 to 3, would be the winners.
Okay.
Just tell us when.
I think you get to pick.
Okay, so then let's do the 29th at noon. And we will decide at the 7th meeting whether or not we need that meeting.
Member Clark, or Chairwoman Clark, sorry, may I ask a question? Yes. Is there a significance of December? You mentioned a state board meeting in December. Is there something that we need to have done by that date?
Yes, sorry, and you were not at the last meeting, but the idea is that a collection of recommendations from this group will be drafted, and we're hoping to be able to use that as recommendations to the state board for their December meeting.
December, got it. Thank you.
Is that correct? I said that right? Okay. Got to watch me. So if nothing else, then I think are we okay to adjourn?
Yes, just homework. So send me your bullet points if you have yet to do so, or if anything comes up between now and November 7th, you talk to your constituent groups, feed me back that information. And then secondly, just email me the day and time of a week day that works best for you in 2019 so we can try to get a consistent every month meeting.
And just to echo that, the idea is that the state board staff is going to take this collection of conversation today and begin to draft a series of thoughts and recommendations. So that is why don't take too long to get them to her. And we will chase you if we don't get them because we want all voices heard. So we appreciate everybody getting those to her if you haven't already. All right, with that, we're adjourned. Sorry we went a few minutes over.